Good morning. Welcome to the September 2019 open meeting of the Federal Communications Commission. Madam Secretary, can you please announce our agenda for the morning?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you and good morning, Commissioners. For today's meeting, you will hear 5 items for your consideration. First, you will consider a report and order that would allocate $950 million in fixed and mobile high-cost universal service support for Stage 2 of the Uniendo of Puerto Rico Fund and the Connect USVI Fund to expand, improve, and harden communication networks in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. The Commission will also consider an order on reconsideration that would dispose of 2 petitions related to Uniendo, a Puerto Rico Fund, and Connect USVI Fund, Advanced Support and Stage 1 Support. Second, you will consider a report and order and modification of Section 214 authorizations that would adopt reforms to eliminate wasteful access arbitrage schemes and promote the efficient use of the nation's communications networks. Third, you will consider a public notice that would seek comment on procedures to be used for Auction 105, the auction of priority access licenses, or PALs, in the 3.5 gigahertz band. Fourth, you will consider a further notice of proposed rulemaking that would propose to modernize and simplify the written and on-air public notices broadcasters must provide upon the filing of certain applications. Fifth, you will consider a report and order that would align the direct broadcast satellite licensing procedures with those of geostationary orbit-fixed satellite service satellites. This is your agenda for today. The first item, entitled the Uniendo of Puerto Rico Fund and the Connect USVI Fund, Connect America Fund, and ETC annual reports and certifications, will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau, and Chris Monteith, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Ms. Monteith, the floor is yours, and I appreciate in advance your willingness to deliver your remarks in Spanish.
En français, c'est possible, mais malheureusement, pas en espagnol. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Today, the Wireline Competition Bureau presents for your consideration a report and order on reconsideration that, if adopted, would provide nearly $1 billion in universal service support to the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands for the improvement and expansion of high-speed, resilient broadband networks following the extensive damage to infrastructure caused by the devastating hurricane season in 2017. I would like to thank the Telecommunications Access Policy Division for their hard work on this item. I would also like to acknowledge the valuable input we received from our colleagues in the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, the Office of General Counsel, and the Office of Economics and Analytics. Seated with me at the table from the Wireline Competition Bureau are Dan Kahn, Associate Bureau Chief, and from the Telecommunications Access Policy Division, Ryan Palmer, Division Chief, Alex Menard, Deputy Division Chief, and Kwa Win, Attorney Advisor. Kwa will now present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. In September 2017, Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Maria caused widespread devastation to Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, destroying thousands of homes and causing near total destruction of critical infrastructure, including communications networks. As a result, citizens were left without vital lines of communication during and after these dangerous storms. The Commission acted quickly and has taken numerous actions in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands following the devastation of Hurricanes Irma and Maria. To date, the Commission has provided carriers with approximately $130 million in funding from the Universal Service Fund to assist with network restoration, bringing the total high-cost universal service support invested in the territories since the 2017 hurricanes to more than $382.4 million. If adopted, this order will take the next step by turning from post-storm restoration to enabling the deployment of high-speed, storm-hardened networks to all Americans in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. First, this order will create a single-round competitive proposal process to award up to $691.2 million in Stage 2 high-cost support over a 10-year period for fixed voice and broadband services in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Proposals will be scored based on objective criteria reflecting price, performance, resiliency, and redundancy. Winning applicants will be required to provide service to all locations within geographic areas for which they win support within 6 years. Second, this order will also provide up to $258.8 million in Stage 2 high-cost support over 3 years for mobile voice and broadband services in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, while the Commission works to develop a long-term competitive support plan for mobile providers in the territories. Eligible mobile providers may use up to 75% of their total support on high-speed 4G, LTE, or better technology, and providers may use up to 25% of their total support for deploying 5G technology. Third, this order will also require all recipients of Stage 2 support to maintain and implement a disaster preparation and response plan and to perform mandatory reporting in the Commission's Disaster Information Reporting System in the event of a future hurricane or other disaster. Finally, if adopted, this order will resolve 2 petitions for reconsideration relating to advanced emergency support and Stage 1 support. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges extending only to technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nguyen, for your presentation. We'll now turn to comments from the bench, beginning with Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will submit a longer statement, but just make a few points. This item is well-intended effort to reform the Commission's legacy approach in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, where leadership has historically been poor and providers have earned questionable reputations. While I support many parts of the draft and commend the Chairman's office and staff for their extremely hard work, I am concerned about certain portions. These include the overbuilding exception, single-round bidding, 5G requirements, and the mandatory DERS reporting. Despite some real issues, this item hopefully will make considerable progress in overcoming the inefficient and unaccountable legacy system in Puerto Rico and U.S. Virgin Islands, and I commend the Chairman for it. I'll be carefully watching the outcome of the competitive bidding process, and I will vote to approve. I thank the Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Carr.
Thanks. Roberto Musenden has worked here at the FCC on public safety issues for more than 20 years. With Hurricanes Irma and Maria having devastated Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, he immediately volunteered to deploy as part of the FCC's initial response. Having grown up in Puerto Rico, Roberto said that for him, it was personal. And since that initial trip 2 years ago, Roberto has spent 1 week per month on the island as part of the FCC and FEMA's ongoing response. He spoke about his experience there and the work he did to help turn things around. And I want to share just a snapshot of his service. When he first landed, he said he found the island close to apocalyptic. Vegetation ripped out, no lights, no traffic, just silence and devastation. The storm had torn apart the power grid, pulled down 1,000-foot communications towers, and destroyed people's homes. When various agencies and organizations arrived, from federal entities like FEMA to the NYPD, they were all using different frequencies to communicate. Roberto immediately set about coordinating frequencies to ensure that those who needed to communicate could reach each other while avoiding interference to others. He served as a valuable point of contact for communications providers in Puerto Rico, a consistent and dependable face in a time of crisis. He helped broadcasters and internet providers get the streamlined approvals and waivers they needed to start rebuilding and upgrading their infrastructure immediately. And he ensured that those who wanted to use new technologies, such as Google's Loon, to get people back online, obtain the experimental licenses they needed to get up and running quickly. In short, Roberto represents the very best of public service. And we're lucky to have him and so many other dedicated professionals at the FCC. In fact, Roberto's efforts are part of a broader and unprecedented FCC response to hurricanes that devastated Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. The FCC stood up an incident management team consisting of technical and policy experts drawn from the Commission's bureaus and offices. FEMA and the FCC coordinated communications-related efforts through Emergency Support Function 2, and the FCC deployed roll call and spectrum management experts to monitor and determine the storm's impact on wireless communications. The FCC also expedited regulatory action in the critical days and hours after the storms. We waived lifeline rules to ensure that consumers wouldn't be cut off just when they needed service the most. We provided additional E-rate support to schools and libraries that needed to replace damaged equipment, and we waived rules to speed deployment. In total, we granted around 900 requests for special temporary authority. FCC leadership also undertook fact-finding missions to the hardest-hit regions. We stood up a hurricane recovery task force that took a meticulous and comprehensive approach to the issues, holding public workshops, engaging stakeholders, and providing key findings that we've now been able to build on. These efforts helped accelerate the recovery. Within 6 months of the storm, one provider in Puerto Rico had restored 75% of its wireline network, nearly completing recovery 3 months later. In the Virgin Islands, another provider restored 100% of its network within 8 months of Maria's landfall. And the recovery for mobile cell sites was even faster, with one provider restoring 100% of its cell site on the Virgin Islands within 4 months. And FCC funding was a key part of many of these efforts. In the wake of the storm, we made available $77 million in support for the immediate restoration of communications networks. We also established the Uniendo of Puerto Rico and Connect USVI funds, through which we've already made available an additional $64 million in support for restoration. Today, we take the next step in promoting a sustainable and long-term recovery effort. We vote to make nearly $950 million in additional funding available, with an eye toward funding resilient networks that are better able to withstand future storms. And on this score, I want to thank my colleagues for agreeing to edits that create incentives for carriers to place any new aerial lines on hardened composite poles, which will help ensure that we have an even more robust network going forward. The efforts of hardworking FCC staff have not gone unnoticed. In June of 2018, the governor of Puerto Rico thanked the FCC for, quote, addressing the immediate need of restoring and advancing Puerto Rico's communications infrastructure. In July of 2019, the governor of the U.S. Virgin Islands wrote, "I'm extremely grateful for the FCC's prompt action in the days and weeks immediately following the storm. These efforts helped restore our vital communications networks." So I want to add my thanks to the FCC staff here in Washington, in our field offices, and those that deployed after the storms for all the work that you have done to support this recovery effort. I'm proud of your work, and I also want to recognize the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, as well as the Wireline Competition Bureau and the Wireless Bureau, for your efforts on today's decision. It has my support, so thanks very much for your work on it. I think there are some, though, for which none of this really matters. Not the facts, not the speed with which communication networks have been restored, or at least it's beside the point. In their view, which is simply to use this proceeding in an effort to try to score partisan political points.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
It was just 2 years ago that Hurricane Maria ravaged Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. We all remember it because the images are impossible to forget. They were searing. We saw whole communities underwater, flooded with more than 30 inches of rain. We saw the destructive aftermath of winds that reached an astonishing 155 miles an hour. The damage and destruction was so severe that the toll the storm took may never be fully understood. But experts say we lost more than 4,600 lives in the storm and its aftermath. And on top of that horrific loss of life, Hurricane Maria left $90 billion in damages, including significant harm to communications networks. In the wake of this tragedy, I visited Puerto Rico. Now, I've spent a lot of time on Puerto Rico in the past because I had family that lived there when I was growing up. But this trip was different. 6 months after the storm, I went to learn about its recovery, and I was disappointed then, and I remain disappointed now, that the Federal Communications Commission refused to even hold a single hearing in Puerto Rico in the aftermath of this disaster. What I saw there was powerful. The damage from Hurricane Maria was still out in the open for all to see. Traffic lights didn't work. Streets were unexpectedly dark at night. Businesses were closed. Construction gates still surrounded stray blocks of concrete and rebar. There were gashes in infrastructure and signs missing along the roads that needed no explanation for their absence. These are the marks of a storm that just doesn't go away, that reminds its residents of the awful harm that wind and rain can do to a community, an economy, and its way of life. While there, I knew it was important to get out of the city, so I headed west from San Juan to Toa Baja. It's a rural area, and it's near where sugarcane fields once stood, when agriculture loomed larger in the Puerto Rican economy. The low-slung houses there are arranged in a tight grid along the banks of a small creek, and long ago that creek was used to irrigate those sugarcane fields. But in more recent years, that creek just gurgled along, a border of sorts, for a small neighborhood known as Villa Calma. Now, Villa Calma was hard hit by the hurricane. The ocean swelled, and the banks of that creek rose up and filled the first floor of every home in the neighborhood. And as the water poured in, Millie Ortiz, who I had the pleasure to meet, organized her neighbors and pulled hundreds of the residents of that village into the school, which was on higher ground. They lived there together for a week before the government relocated them and found them all new shelter. Now, when I met Millie, they were rebuilding Villa Calma, and she showed me the community kitchen they had built and a plot of land where they were going to develop a neighborhood garden. But it was clear that none of this would be easy because the wet and rotten mess of the hurricane was still being pulled from each home, dried on the streets, sorted through, and what was not salvageable carried away. And from what I saw, the hardship was undeniable. But so was the heroism. When we read about Puerto Rico, the news is rough. The recovery is long. But what stays with me from that visit is the resilience of the people I met. They were just extraordinary. So today's decision is encouraging. It provides more than $900 million to improve, expand, and harden broadband networks in communities devastated by Hurricane Maria and its accompanying storms. I support the outcome because it refashions universal service support for communications in Villa Calma, all of Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands in light of the damage that was suffered during these storms. But I concur because this is simply not how I would have structured our response. At the outset, in the 2 years since Hurricane Maria made landfall, the FCC has spent over $100 million in universal service funds in an effort to boost the restoration of communications in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. However, comb through the text of this decision, and it's apparent the FCC does not have an honest picture of where those funds were even spent and what the current state of communications facilities looks like on the ground. We should know with precision what was spent and where. And we should fashion what we do today around all of that information. But we do not. That's regrettable. It's an invitation for waste because it fails to ensure we are directing funding to areas with the greatest need. Now, looking forward, I also believe we need to have a better playbook for disaster because the hard truth is that Hurricane Maria will not be the last extreme weather event to wreak havoc on communications infrastructure. It's time for the FCC to develop a consistent and reliable approach to ensuring the resiliency of networks in disaster. Here are 3 things that a better disaster playbook would include. First, every weather event causing significant damage to communications should be the subject of a timely report from the FCC. It should be supported by field hearings, just as this agency did following Hurricane Katrina and Superstorm Sandy. But on this score, our approach to Hurricane Maria fell short. As I said at the start, the FCC refused to hold a single field hearing. It also issued a slim report summarizing damage a full year after the storm took place. We owe communities a timely and comprehensive investigation of what went right, what went wrong, and how we can be better prepared in disaster. Second, the FCC must improve its situational awareness regarding communications outages. It's hard to believe, but the FCC's network outage reporting system does not require carriers to report on disruptions or outages involving broadband service. That means if the infrastructure that supports our digital world and so much of modern life goes down, the FCC will not have a full picture of the problem. That's crazy. The expert agency with responsibility for our nation's communications has no mandatory reporting for what broadband was cut off and when. That means it has no real ability to study patterns of failures and develop policies to help keep our networks up and running. Now, a proposal to address this hole in our reporting system has been pending for 3 years. It's time to take action and fix it. Third, we need to do more to ensure our networks are resilient. A good place to start is with the Wireless Resiliency Framework, which was an outgrowth of Congressman Pallone's work to improve networks in disaster following Superstorm Sandy. But last year, the Government Accountability Office reviewed FCC efforts pursuant to this framework and found they were lacking. The GAO concluded we need to do more to promote awareness, develop measurable objectives, and monitor outcomes to help ensure compliance. In response, the FCC has sought comment on improvements to the framework on 4 separate occasions. Enough. We don't need more comments. We need enforceable commitments. But our work on wireless resiliency should not be static. Our networks are changing, and our thinking should evolve too. With the advent of 5G wireless service, we are seeking large-scale, small-cell deployment. That means our old way of thinking about fuel, backup power, and tracking the percentage of cell sites out of service after disaster requires a revamp. While virtualizing our networks might mean new self-help and self-healing capabilities, it also introduces new challenges for reliability. This is why our next infrastructure proceeding needs to be about updating our wireless resiliency policies and frameworks for the 5G era. We should get started now and not wait for the next disaster. Finally, today's order is eerily silent on the larger network security and supply chain discussion that is happening right now. So let me put this in plain terms. None of the universal service funding we authorize today should be spent on the purchase of network equipment that could raise national security concerns. I'm absolutely mystified that this was not made a clear condition of the network funding offered today, especially because there is an active United States military presence on Puerto Rico, and that includes military installations. The FCC should have made this prohibition clear in this decision, and it should not wait another day to resolve the outstanding rulemaking we have on supply chain matters more broadly. I appreciate the work that went into today's decision, and I am hopeful, despite my concerns, that it will mean real progress for network development in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. I concur.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Starks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 years ago, Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, claiming more than 3,000 lives and causing tens of billions of dollars in damage. This damage included nearly complete destruction of communication networks in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, and the people there have demonstrated their resilience through efforts to rebuild. and restore not only their cherished way of life, but their infrastructure. The FCC has provided timely and critical funding for network restoration and initial rebuilding in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands over the past 2 years, and we know that Puerto Rico is under constant threat of hurricanes and tropical storms. We need to be thoughtful of what has been done in the past in response to these storms and make sure that our networks perform better, are rebuilt stronger, and are resilient in the future. And while restoration has come a long way, it does continue today. And part of that work involves rebuilding the communication networks, and in order to ensure that people in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands have the same connectivity and opportunity as any other American, communication networks have to be rebuilt stronger and not just provide high-quality internet service, but also have to have the strength and redundancy as an essential part of their design to ensure that they withstand future storms. Today's order sets up a process for providing funding for fixed and mobile service providers operating in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands to support them in that rebuilding and strengthening of their networks. This support will be essential to provide the kind of service that the people of Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands demand and deserve, and that the Communications Act commands us to make sure is available. This support recognizes the unique and ongoing reconstruction and restoration needs that exist in Puerto Rico and in the Virgin Islands, and I was glad that the Commission recognized these unique needs and conditions in 2 orders adopted recently, addressing the forbearance petition related to wired network loops and transport links. And in these orders, the Commission made changes to the way some of the fixed voice and broadband providers' networks are regulated. But the Commission agreed with my request to hold off on implementing these orders in Puerto Rico so that the carriers there could focus on that much-needed rebuilding rather than regulatory changes. Recognizing that recovery is ongoing in Puerto Rico and in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and establishing a funding process to support strengthening networks, as today's order does, will provide important and necessary help to Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. I support this order. Thank the staff of the Wireline Competition Bureau, my old colleague Kwa, good work, and thank you so much for all of your hard work.
Thank you, Commissioner. Hurricanes Irma and Maria wrought unprecedented devastation on Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. The FCC's response to help the territories recover and rebuild was unprecedented as well. Among other steps, as Mr. Nguyen pointed out, we provided carriers approximately $130 million in extra subsidies from the Universal Service Fund, or USF, to assist with the restoration of communications networks. The road to recovery in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands has been long. I saw that in Utuado, Puerto Rico, where utility poles were broken like matchsticks and fibers severed as easily as spider webs. I also saw it in St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands, where I saw the utterly destroyed radio and television station WTJX. Now, since then, the good news with respect to communications is that service has been largely restored. But that doesn't mean that the FCC's work is done. Now we need to and will execute a long-term strategy to improve, expand, and harden broadband networks on the islands for at least 2 reasons. First, hurricanes are an annual misfortune, and we know that Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands will be hit again by severe storms. So we need hardened communications networks that can withstand hurricanes and will continue serving Americans living in these territories when they need them the most. Second, we need to close the digital divide in the territories. Simply put, everyone in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands who wants it should have high-speed internet access, and the economic, educational, healthcare, civic, and other services that broadband enables. Digital opportunity is not a value that is limited to the mainland. Now, to execute this long-term strategy, today we allocate almost $1 billion in funding from the USF to deploy improved, expanded, and hardened fixed and mobile broadband networks in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. On the fixed side, we implement a balanced approach for awarding support that will reward carriers that will provide high-quality service in a cost-efficient manner and help build resilient networks. On the mobile side, for the first time ever, we specifically set aside USF funding to support 5G deployment. And this was important to me because I do not want Puerto Ricans or Virgin Islanders to be left behind when it comes to the next generation of wireless connectivity and the enormous potential that 5G holds. Now, I'm pleased that with the broad support, that our approach has received from those who live in and serve Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. For example, U.S. Representative Jennifer Gonzalez Colon of Puerto Rico wrote just this week, and I quote, "Resilient telecommunications, improved connectivity, increased bandwidth, and easier access are essential for the education of our future generations, the safety of our communities, and reestablishing economic and workforce growth in Puerto Rico, helping us to face future challenges. I strongly support this initiative and urge the commissioners to make the proposed resources available to the people of the U.S. Caribbean. As Puerto Rico continues to work to resolve its crisis, telecommunications will be a key sector in our economic recovery. Chairman Pai's proposal will be an invaluable tool in this task. And I, in turn, would like to thank Representative Gonzalez Colon for all she has done to help the people of Puerto Rico in the 2 years following Irma and Maria. In 2018, she organized and kindly invited me to join her at a communications roundtable in Puerto Rico. And the feedback that we received at that event from public and private sector officials alike helped to shape my thinking on the order that we are adopting today. I also would like to thank other officials in the governments of Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands who have worked with us and have supported our efforts from the earliest days. Commissioner Carr mentioned some of them, but in addition, I am grateful to Sandra Torres Lopez, President of the Junta Reglamentadora de Telecomunicaciones de Puerto Rico, the territory's FCC counterpart, and Alexandra Fernandez Navarro, Associate Member of a related body of the Public Service Commission, as well as a member of the FCC's Intergovernmental Advisory Committee. I appreciate as well the work of the Public Service Commission of the U.S. Virgin Islands, including Chairman Emeritus and Commissioner John Clendenin, who also serves on the IAC and hosted me, along with other commissioners of the Virgin Islands Public Service Commission, for a roundtable in those islands. The dedication that these and many other officials have shown to their territories and the assistance and expertise they have lent us in our deliberations have been incredibly helpful. Last but not least, I would also like to thank the incredible work of the Commission's staff that are working to secure a connected future for Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, including, of course, my commissioners who were very helpful in providing suggestions on improving today's item, with the exclusion of suggestions that were presented at the dais for the first time today, but also the FCC's career staff, including Talmadge Cox, Rebecca Douglas, Jesse Jackman, Dan Kahn, Alexander Menard, Chris Monteith, Kwa Win, and Ryan Palmer of the Wireline Competition Bureau, Octavian Carrari, Patrick DeGraba, Chelsea Fallon, Evan Quarell, Kenneth Lynch, Elliot Manor, Catherine Matraves, Julia McHenry, Eric Ralph, Steve Rosenberg, Emmy Talaga, and Margie Weiner of the Office of Economics and Analytics, Chris Anderson, Justin Kane, Lisa Folks, Jeff Goldthorpe, John Healy, Jennifer Holtz, Lauren Kravitz, Ahmed Lajuji, Nicole McGinnis, Roberto Mussenden, Renee Rowland, and Brenda Villanueva of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, Aaron Boone, Ben Freeman, Garnet Hanley, Pramesh Jobanputra, Ziad Salim, and Matthew Warner of the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, Martin Doxcat, Barbara Pavon of the Office of Engineering and Technology, Denise Coca and Carrie Murray of the International Bureau, and Melina Barzilai, Deborah Broderson, Michael Carlson, Neil Deller, Tom Driscoll, David Horowitz, Richard Mallon, Keith McRickard, Linda Oliver, and Bill Richardson off the Office of General Counsel. I apologize for taking time to read out all of their names, but I think it's important for folks to recognize that a great many folks across this commission have dedicated a lot of time and effort to getting it right, and there's no cause higher, in my view, than this one. Thank you for the work you've put in. We'll now proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner O'Reilly?
Aye.
Commissioner Carr?
Approve.
Commissioner Rosenworcel?
Concur.
Commissioner Starks?
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Thank you for the fantastic work. And with that, Madam Secretary, we go to item number 2 on the agenda.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the next item will also be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau and is entitled Updating the Intercarrier Compensation Regime to Eliminate Access Arbitrage.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And Ms. Monteith, whenever you and your team are ready, the floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the Wireline Competition Bureau presents for your consideration an item on access arbitrage that would reduce the financial incentives for local exchange carriers to engage in schemes designed to exploit the intercarrier compensation system by artificially stimulating the volume of traffic that terminates on their networks. The item was developed by the Wireline Competition Bureau with input from the Office of Economics and Analytics and the Office of General Counsel. I would like to thank the staff in the Bureau's Pricing Policy Division for their hard work on this item. Although time does not permit me to mention all of those who have contributed by name, I am deeply grateful for their dedication and hard work, which produced the item we offer for your consideration today. Seated with me at the table from the Wireline Competition Bureau are Lisa Hone, Deputy Bureau Chief, Gil Strobel, Division Chief, Lynn Ingledow, Deputy Division Chief, Al Lewis, Special Counsel, and Eric Raven Hansen, Attorney Advisor. And from the Office of Economics and Analytics, Shane Taylor, Economist in the Economic Analysis Division. Eric will now present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Morning.
The item before you would address a form of arbitrage in the intercarrier compensation system known as access stimulation. Access stimulating local exchange carriers, or LECs, partner with high-volume calling services, such as free conference calling providers or chat lines, to stimulate calls directed to those services to increase LECs, access charge revenue, and that of the intermediate providers they use to deliver calls to their networks. Currently, inter-exchange and wireless carriers are obligated to pay these access charges, and they pass those costs to their customers, who are forced to subsidize the free high-volume services. Although the Commission's 2011 transformation order moved most terminating end-office access charges to bill and keep, and successfully reduced industry costs of access arbitrage, access stimulating LECs and their partners have adjusted their tactics. Today, access stimulating LECs exploit terminating tandem switching and transport charges to generate intercarrier compensation from inter-exchange carriers, and by extension, from their customers for the LECs and the intermediate providers in the call path. As a result, access stimulating LECs tend to operate where tandem switching and transport rates remain high. The item before you would increase the scope and effectiveness of the Commission's anti-arbitrage rules by shifting financial responsibility for tandem switching and transport charges to access stimulating LECs. This shift would strengthen such carriers' incentive to route traffic efficiently, thereby reducing costs and eliminating implicit subsidies. If adopted, the rules in this order would require the access stimulating LEC to pay for tandem switching and transport for all calls that terminate at the LEC's end office. The access stimulating LEC chooses the transport route, and the new rules would create a strong incentive for the LEC to pick the most cost-efficient path. The order would retain the current definition of access stimulation and would also add 2 new alternative tests based on the record. First, competitive local exchange carriers with an interstate terminating to originating traffic ratio of at least 6-to-1 in a calendar month and no revenue sharing agreement would be defined as engaging in access stimulation. Second, the order would define a rate of return local exchange carrier as engaging in access stimulation if it has an interstate terminating to originating traffic ratio of at least 10-to-1 in a 3-month period and also satisfies a threshold of 500,000 minutes or more of interstate terminating minutes of use per month in an end office averaged over the same 3-month period. These 2 new alternative tests would capture access stimulating LECs that have evaded the current rules by not entering into revenue sharing agreements. To aid implementation, the order would, among other things, require access stimulating LECs to file tariff revisions within 45 days of the effective date of the rules. It would likewise grant intermediate access providers the same period of time to make any necessary tariff revisions and billing system changes. Finally, the order would also modify the Section 214 authorizations for centralized equal access providers with mandatory use provisions, eliminating those mandatory use requirements for traffic destined to access stimulating LECs. The modification would enable inter-exchange carriers to voluntarily agree to directly connect the access stimulating leg or to use any intermediate access provider chosen by an access stimulating leg. The Bureau recommends adoption of the order and requests editorial privileges extending only to technical and conforming edits. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Raven Hansen, and congratulations on the completion of your first presentation at an FCC open meeting. May there be many more. Now turn to Commissioner O'Reilly for any comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As with other relics of our legacy telephone network, such as jurisdictional separations, tariffing, and Part 32 cost accounting, one might reasonably assume that our intercarrier compensation system would be fading from relevance on its own. Nonetheless, the record makes clear that entire businesses and markets have developed around interstate access charges, even in the aftermath of the Commission's 2011 efforts to shift end office terminating charges to bill and keep and establish that framework as the ultimate end state of intercarrier compensation traffic. Based on the numbers cited in the draft, the current costs imposed by access stimulation pale in comparison to those that existed prior to the USF-ICC transformation order. While access arbitrage is by no means the problem it once was, I support efforts by the Commission to reform our intercarrier compensation rules and drive out inefficiencies that continue to plague the system. In terms of this item, the steps we take today on tandem switching and transport are well-meaning, and I certainly support revisions to the draft to try to ensure our new trigger does not capture innocent parties. At the same time, I do worry that delineating between rural local exchange carriers and competitive local exchange carriers runs counter to the spirit, if not the letter, of the Telecom Act. Moreover, I have concerns about the particular line drawing efforts, and I suspect we'll have to revisit them in the future. Over the longer term, we should shift the entire system to bill and keep, which I believe is the only true viable solution, and I hope more comprehensive reform is in the works to do just that. I thank the Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Carr.
Thanks. As I was reviewing this order for a vote today, there was a line that kept coming to my mind from the classic 1993 film Jurassic Park. That line was uttered by Jeff Goldblum's character, Dr. Ian Malcolm, when he remarked that life finds a way. I think if you translate that into telecom, it is arbitrage finds a way. And there's no clearer example of that than the case before us today. The FCC has a complex set of rules that we refer to as the intercarrier compensation regime. We designed the system in the 1980s to ensure that families living in rural America had access to affordable telephone service. And we accomplished this goal through a series of implicit subsidies. Generally speaking, the system required a carrier, known as an IXC, to pay high rates whenever they delivered a call to a local carrier serving a rural community. While we've largely replaced implicit subsidies for rural areas with explicit ones in the form of our Universal Service Program, vestiges of the old intercarrier compensation regime remain, and thus enters the modern-day velociraptor. These are carriers that abuse the intercarrier compensation system for their own profit and leave ordinary Americans footing the bill. One way they do that is through access stimulation. They set up schemes to drive an extreme volume of calls to a carrier that charges high terminating rates. In 2011, the FCC took targeted action to address this abuse, and it made a real difference. Before our decision, arbitrage schemes cost American ratepayers up to $440 million each year. But arbitrage finds a way, and some simply adjusted their scheme. The record identifies one case in which a carrier found 33 cell phones at a single cell site in Florida that were each placing calls lasting more than 16 hours to a known access arbitrager. Another found that a carrier was delivering more traffic to a small town in rural South Dakota than through all of a major carrier's facilities in New York City. So while the problem has declined in the years since our 2011 decision, abuse still costs American ratepayers up to $80 million per year. Today's order gets to the heart of the problem by correcting the incentives. If a carrier engages in access stimulation, they will not be able to foist those costs onto ratepayers and profit at our expense. While this might not put a final nail in the coffin in all efforts to stop abuse of the system, it's a significant step toward protecting ratepayers from costly arbitrage schemes. So I want to thank the Wireline Bureau, the Office of Economics and Analytics as well, for all of your work on the item. It has my support. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
I'm not going to have a statement, but I do want to say this. There is probably no issue that is more complex and Byzantine at this agency than intercarrier compensation. And that's saying something. So kudos to all the people in the Wireline Bureau, including those individuals at the table, for your work to try to address this element of access stimulation. It's my hope that we will monitor the changes we make so that we will understand the consequences, both intended and unintended, going forward.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Starks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With today's order, the Commission takes further action to stop access arbitrage activity that misuses the access charge system and improperly shifts the costs of completing calls. I support this effort. Access arbitrage is a scheme where companies stimulate traffic to high-cost areas, rack up huge numbers of calling minutes, and are paid a portion of the resulting revenue. Despite previous Commission efforts to thwart this activity, the practice has nevertheless continued. And so today we take another action that goes to the heart of the matter, curbing the financial incentives that make arbitrage so lucrative. Ultimately, the costs associated with these schemes are borne by consumers on their phone bills, and I'm hopeful that today's item will provide much-needed relief. Thanks so much to the Bureau for your hard work on this item and tireless efforts to eliminate wasteful arbitrage.
Thank you, Commissioner. Most of us have probably heard the saying, there's no such thing as a free lunch. But as it turns out, there is also no such thing as a free conference call. Instead, we all end up footing the bill for these purportedly free calls. Now, as my colleagues have suggested, a detailed explanation of how this works could serve as a substitute for Ambien, so I'll just try to summarize the basics. Today, the intercarrier compensation system governs how phone companies pay each other for carrying and completing calls. And high-volume calling services like free conference calls and chat lines take advantage of inefficiencies in this system. Specifically, local phone companies make arrangements with providers of high-volume calling services to inflate their incoming call traffic. And this artificially increases their access charge revenues. And this is the practice called access stimulation, and it is a profitable arbitrage that results in excessive access charges that long-distance companies are forced to pay, to the tune of $60 to $80 million each and every year. But of course, this lunch isn't free. Long-distance carriers generally spread those costs across all of their customers, regardless of which ones actually made calls to high-volume calling services. So all of us American consumers ultimately pay for these so-called free services. Now, to combat wasteful access stimulation schemes, the FCC made several reforms in 2011 under then-Chairman Janikowski's leadership. But gaming of the system has persisted, and so today we take additional action to remove the financial incentives to engage in this arbitrage. First, to eliminate the use of our intercarrier compensation system to subsidize free, high-volume calling services, we shift financial responsibility for paying certain access charges to the access-stimulating carriers that are responsible for generating them. Second, recognizing the evolving nature of these schemes, we close a loophole that allowed access-stimulating carriers to profit from high-volume calling, even without using a revenue-sharing arrangement. At the same time, we calibrate the traffic ratios in our new rules to avoid ensnaring rural carriers that have higher ratios of inbound to outbound calling traffic but aren't engaged in access stimulation. This is a very good work product, and it has my support, of course, and for the outstanding work on it, I would like to thank the staff of the Wireline Competition Bureau, the Enforcement Bureau, the Office of Economics and Analytics, the Office of Communications, Business Opportunities, and the Office of General Counsel. I will now proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner O'Reilly?
Aye.
Commissioner Carr?
Approve.
Commissioner Rosenworcel?
Approve.
Commissioner Starks?
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Thanks very much for the good work. Madam Secretary, to item number 3 we go.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the third item on your agenda will be presented by the Office of Economics and Analytics and the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau and is entitled Auction of Priority Access Licenses for the 3550 to 3650 megahertz band. Comment sought on competitive bidding procedures for Auction 105.
Thank you,
Julia-
Madam. Oh, sorry.
Julia McHenry, Chief of the Office, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Chief McHenry, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Today, the Office of Economics and Analytics and the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau present for your consideration a public notice that, if adopted, would seek comment on the proposed application and bidding procedures for the auction of priority access licenses, known as PALs, in the Citizens Broadband radio service in the 3550 to 3650 megahertz portion of the 3.5 gigahertz band. I would like to thank the Auctions Division for all their hard work that went into this item. Of course, it was a joint effort, so I would like to acknowledge the valuable input we received from our colleagues in the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. As with all of our recent spectrum auction items, the collaboration between OEA and WTB has been integral to getting these public notices where they are today. Seated with me here at the table are, from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, Don Stockdale, Bureau Chief, Matthew Pearl, Assistant Bureau Chief, Jessica Quinley, Attorney Advisor, and from the Auctions Division of the Office of Economics and Analytics, Bill Huber, Associate Division Chief, Martha Stansel, Assistant Chief, Mary Lovejoy, Attorney Advisor. Mary will now present the item.
Thank you, Julia.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. With this public notice seeking comment on proposed procedures for Auction 105, we announce that bidding is scheduled to commence on June 25th, 2020 for priority access licenses, also known as PALs, in a portion of the 3.5 gigahertz band. This auction will offer 7 PALs in each county-based license area for a total of 22,631 licenses, and each PAL will consist of a generic 10 megahertz unpaired channel of spectrum in the 3550 to 3650 megahertz band. Consistent with the Commission's aggregation rules, potential priority access licensees will be permitted to bid for up to 4 PALs per county. Putting this mid-band spectrum, which is prime spectrum for 5G and other advanced wireless services, into the commercial marketplace is another critical component of the Commission's 5G Fast Plan. The public notice proposes to use an ascending clock auction format in which bidders indicate the number of generic license blocks in specific counties that they demand at prices associated with the round. Under this format, the clock price for all blocks in each county would increase from round to round if bidders indicate total demand that exceeds the 7 blocks available for PALs. The clock rounds would continue until, for all counties, the number of blocks demanded does not exceed the available supply. These proposed procedures are similar to those that were used in Auction 102 and that will be used in Auction 103 later this year. But the public notice describes several features that will make Auction 105 different. First, there will be no assignment phase in Auction 105, as priority access licensees will be authorized to use specific frequencies that will be dynamically assigned by frequency coordinators, known as Spectrum Access Systems, or SASs. Second, as decided by the Commission in the 3.5 gigahertz order, to give greater bidding flexibility to bidders interested in serving areas larger than a county, the public notice seeks comment on a proposal to give any bidder the option to bid on all the counties in any of the 172 cellular market areas that are designated metropolitan statistical areas and that comprise more than one county. Third, while the public notice proposes to adopt the standard activity requirement between 90% and 100% of a bidder's bidding eligibility in all clock rounds, it also, for the first time, proposes to use an activity upper limit intended to mitigate the possibility that bidders could lose bidding eligibility when switching bidding across areas. Notwithstanding this additional flexibility afforded bidders, the activity as applied by the auction system during bid processing would never exceed the bidder's current eligibility. Additionally, consistent with other recent auctions, the public notice proposes to limit information available in Auction 105 in order to prevent the identification of bidders placing particular bids until after the bidding has closed. Moreover, in accordance with the Commission's decision to offer eligible entities bidding credits in Auction 105, the public notice also proposes to use bidding caps of $25 million for small businesses and $10 million for rural service providers, as well as a $10 million cap on the overall amount of bidding credits that any winning small business bidder may apply to winning licenses in smaller markets, so as to provide parity among eligible small businesses and rural service providers competing against each other in these markets. The Office of Economics and Analytics and the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau recommend that the Commission adopt this public notice and request editorial privileges extending only to technical and conforming edits.
Thank you, Ms. Lovejoy, for that presentation. We'll now turn to comments from the bench, beginning with Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hallelujah! With every passing day, CBRS is becoming more of a reality, and now we have an auction date. I'm delighted to vote in favor of today's public notice seeking comment on the procedures for the June 25th, 2020 PAL auction. This item provides interested parties not only the opportunity to comment on the proposed auction structure, but also a necessary heads up so that they can formulate their bidding strategies and business plans to actively participate in the auction. It has been a great 2 weeks for CBRS. Last week, we started out with a public notice announcing the first group of spectrum access system providers could initiate commercial service in the band, which was followed by a very well-attended and enormously successful CBRS rebranded as OnGo launch event. I was honored to be invited, represent the Commission, and address such a broad cross-section of esteemed industry professionals. But the best and most memorable part was to experience the excitement in the room about the future of 3.5 gigahertz. After all this time, it was great to see everyone's hard work come to fruition, especially the Commission's. Now the true fun begins. We get to see what America's innovators, entrepreneurs, and creative minds will make of this band. Until the completion of the PAL auction, CBRS will be available under our unlicensed-like general authorized access rules. This will allow industry to prove that this new sharing mechanism will work to protect incumbents when clearing is not an option. Hopefully, in the near future, we can review and improve the protection zones, technical rules, and power limits to ensure that they are no larger or more protective than necessary. Such tweaks will make it easier for industry to provide services to the millions of Americans clamoring for more wireless services and devices. We don't know the full panoply of possible offerings to come. That is something the market will ultimately decide. But with 5G standards on the way, 3.5 gigahertz is likely to be one of the first 5G bands deployed despite any previous naysayers. As far as the public notice before us goes, it is fairly straightforward in seeking comment and providing initial details on the upcoming auction. Some parties asked questions about and sought clarification on the CMA-level bidding concept, and I'm comfortable with that. The truth is that allowing such bidding in only the largest markets doesn't skew the outcome, favor any particular auction participant, or have any real impact on rural markets. It merely provides a bidding tool to ease participation for entities that seek larger geographic areas and was part of the balanced negotiated agreement that resulted in county-size licenses rather than larger units. In the grand scheme, the great step forward we take today doesn't eliminate the need for more mid-band spectrum. In fact, I look forward to the Commission action on 3.7 to 4.2 gigahertz in the coming months. Let's get the C-band done. And I was pleased to hear the Chairman recently say that the Commission staff is studying how commercial services can be introduced into 3.1 to 3.55 gigahertz band. We should also be doing all we can to promote the global harmonization of these frequencies, particularly 3.1 to 3.4 gigahertz, which does not have a mobile allocation, so that the offerings will be cost-effective and internationally available. Additionally, we must expedite our work on the 6 gigahertz band to ensure there's enough spectrum for unlicensed services, and we should start actively pursuing 7 gigahertz, which Representatives Doyle and Latta implicated earlier this week as well. Finally, I thank the Chairman for making this band a priority and providing me with the opportunity to lead the PAL review, my fellow Commissioners for working with me to get to this point, and the dedicated Commission staff who've put in and continue to dedicate countless hours to make this band a success. I thank the Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Carr.
Thanks. Yankees, Red Sox, my beloved Chiefs, and my despised Patriots. Democrats, Republicans, those who say aye when voting for FCC items, and those who correctly say approve. In this time of division, what can bring such bitter rivals together? The answer is right in front of us. It's 3.5. You see, last week on the same stage appeared a cast of characters not often known for holding hands and singing Kumbaya. Verizon AT&T, Google Charter, a group that runs trains, and a group that flies planes. Even the FCC, NTIA, and DoD, surprisingly. They were celebrating the launch of OnGo, a private certification effort to commercialize the 3.5 gigahertz band. Apparently, they didn't think that our branding of Citizens Broadband radio service would roll off the tongue as well as OnGo. But it's a sign that the private sector is ready to put this spectrum to use and has confidence in the band's potential. It's also a milestone on this commission's road to freeing up more mid-band spectrum. Commissioner O'Reilly deservedly was on stage to celebrate last week, and I want to join in the chorus that is rightly thanking him for his leadership and continued work on this effort. 5G services will rely on every spectrum band, low, mid, and high. Low band will provide the coverage needed to bring 5G to every corner of America. Mid-band will provide mobility at fast speeds, and high band will provide the fiber-like connections needed to support a full range of 5G offerings. All three bands are essential. And so I'm proud of the Commission's all-of-the-above approach to spectrum, which we continue in this public notice. I want to thank the Office of Economics and Analytics, as well as the Wireless Bureau, for their work on the item. It has my support. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner, and welcome to Chiefs Nation. Commissioner Rosenbristle.
Earlier this year, I wrote in Wired that if the United States wants to lead in the next generation of wireless service, we have work to do. It starts with this agency making it a priority to auction mid-band spectrum. It is the only way we can extend the promise of competitive 5G wireless service to everyone, everywhere nationwide. So I support today's decision, which, at long last, kicks off a process to bring mid-band spectrum to market. In fact, the 3.5 gigahertz band is a terrific place to start to do this. That's because our policies here build on a long tradition of spectrum innovation in the United States. When it comes to wireless policy, we have a history of embracing the ideas that are cool, kooky, and new before anyone else. After all, it was more than 2 decades ago that we took the academic ideas of Ronald Coase and ushered in a whole new era of spectrum auctions. We also pioneered the use of unlicensed spectrum, which are really the airwaves we know and use every day now as Wi-Fi. More recently, we blazed a trail for two-sided incentive auctions, and with each of these efforts, we reoriented ourselves from what was to what could be. In doing so, we changed the way that wireless systems are developed and distributed, not just domestically, but worldwide. 4 years ago, this agency recognized that our traditional spectrum auctions needed an update too, and that the 3.5 gigahertz band was the perfect place to test a new framework. Instead of relying on the traditional binary choice between licensed and unlicensed, the agency adopted an unprecedented 3-tiered model for spectrum sharing and management. Under this 3-tiered system, incumbent government users have a primary and preemptive right. But we know they do not need access all the time, everywhere, so we created secondary license opportunities, custom-built for small cells. Then, to the extent the demand for licenses is limited, opportunistic use is permitted by rule. To coordinate this grand effort, we propose dynamic spectrum access systems. And here's the best part. The framework we put in place for the 3.5 gigahertz band was ideal for 5G service too. The very structure of this band recognized that, the smartphone might be the least interesting thing about our 5G future. Instead, this band was designed for innovation. It recognized that we are on the verge of a new networked world with connectivity built into everything around us. So in addition to the familiar carriers, we saw early interest in this band from entities that support industrial operations and wanted to use this in spectrum for intelligent manufacturing, power generation and distribution, healthcare, and more. Our record supported its use for advanced inspection and sensor technologies, including aerial drones, terrestrial crawlers, and even robotics. The American Petroleum Institute expressed interest in its use for updating drilling operations. And the Port of Los Angeles wanted to use it for shipping data. Rural interests, too, saw a unique opportunity to bring service and more competition to remote areas of the country that are too often left behind. All of this required that this agency operate with a little regulatory humility. Because at the heart of our initial plan for the 3.5 gigahertz band was the recognition that the FCC could not know who will realize the best use cases for 5G, who will have the best business models for deploying it, or who will have the best ways to extend 5G service to rural communities. So instead of choosing winners and losers in the band, instead of adopting rules that were biased towards certain uses or the same old carriers, we designed rules that would balance the services we know today with the ones that may be coming our way tomorrow. But in key ways, and over my objection, we retreated from this early and inspired vision for the band. In a decision last year, we revisited some of the fundamentals of this framework. We lost our nerve, and we reverted back to the old. Most notably, we expanded license sizes from census tracts to counties, shutting out new spectrum interests that cannot compete on that scale. To make matters worse, in today's public notice, we ask about even larger service territories at auction. I think that continuing down this road, narrowing the range of spectrum interests that could use these airwaves, would be a grave mistake. At a minimum, we must honor the hard-fought compromise that kept service areas in this band defined by counties. To do otherwise would unacceptably risk the opportunities for innovation in this band and new entry points for 5G. In addition, it is important to remember that we didn't get this far all on our own. It wasn't that long ago that the 3.5 gigahertz band was coveted military spectrum. Creating this opportunity, combining incumbent use with new commercial licensed and unlicensed use, took effort. It took working with our federal partners to reach a shared goal. We still need a lot more of this cooperation if we want to realize greater success in securing mid-band spectrum for new mobile use. But lately, it feels like our relationships with our federal partners with spectrum interests have soured. I worry that our ability to make progress with other agencies has devolved under this administration into very public disputes. We see it in the 24 gigahertz band, the 5.9 gigahertz band, the 2.5 gigahertz band, and elsewhere. For the sake of our shared digital future, I hope we can get back on track. We need to do that because while today we put our first mid-band spectrum on the calendar, we have a lot more work to do to regain our wireless leadership. 16 countries are way ahead of us, already having auctioned mid-band spectrum specifically for 5G. South Korea held the first mid-band auction last year. Australia, Finland, Germany, Italy, Ireland, Japan, Kuwait, Latvia, Mexico, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Spain, the United Arab Emirates, and the United Kingdom have already followed. In addition, China allocated spectrum specifically for 5G use in the mid-band last year. This delay in the United States has consequences. While we have focused all of our early energies on high-band spectrum auctions, the rest of the world has left us behind. Moreover, our slow pace of bringing mid-band spectrum to market for 5G will only deepen the digital divide that already plagues too many rural communities in this country. That's because recent commercial launches of 5G service across the country using millimeter wave spectrum are confirming what we already know, that commercializing high-band spectrum will not be easy or cheap, given its propagation challenges. The network densification these airwaves require is substantial. That means high-band 5G service is unlikely outside of the most populated urban areas. So if I had one request, it would be that we speed the day when this agency holds the 3.5 gigahertz auction. In fact, I believe this is vitally important for our economic and national security. And given my druthers, I would hold this auction this year before we bring to market any more high-band spectrum, including the 37, 39, and 47 gigahertz bands. Nonetheless, today's public notice represents progress, and I will grant it my support. And I appreciate my colleagues' willingness to ask more questions in this item about the consequences of auctioning 3.5 gigahertz band in larger blocks. I look forward to the record that develops, and I want to thank the staff for their creative work. And a special shout out to John Leibowitz, formerly of the FCC, for his early vision for these airwaves, and to my colleague, Commissioner O'Reilly, for his efforts to follow through.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Starks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, we take another step on the long road to full commercial service in the 3.5 gigahertz band. With last week's authorization of initial commercial deployments, this public notice continues our progress towards making this valuable mid-band spectrum fully available. Already, handset manufacturers are incorporating it into their devices, and the initial commercial deployments will include private wireless networks for airports, city governments, and wind and solar farms. I will be following this progress closely and look forward to when we can grant approval to full operations across the country. This item proposes rules governing the auction of priority access licenses in the 3.5 gigahertz band scheduled for June 25th, 2020. It will be one of the most complex auctions we've conducted to date, with about 3,200 license areas available for bidding, and I'm excited to move the ball forward on distributing these licenses, but I must express a concern. While I was not on the commission when the agency voted last year to revise the geographic configuration of the PALs from census tracts to counties, I do share Commissioner Rosenworcel's point about whether the current approach will adequately encourage the innovative uses and new entrants that were the focus of the original 3.5 gigahertz order back in 2015. And specifically, today's public notice seeks comment on a proposal to permit cellular market area, CMA level bidding, for blocks within the counties in the top 305 markets. And I appreciate OEA's efforts to propose rules that level the playing field between CMA level bidders and those who will bid on a strictly county basis. But I want to avoid unintended consequences. For example, will county-level bidders be able to compete effectively with CMA-level bidders for blocks and counties within the same CMA as a large city? And notwithstanding limits on the number of blocks a CMA-level bidder can take to obtain in a single county, how likely is it that 2 CMA-level bidders could take up all 7 available PALs in the counties within the CMA? To address these issues, should we be limiting the number of CMAs that are subject to CMA-level bidding? And if so, what limits would we impose? I encourage commenters to share their views on these critical questions. And in addition, these procedures can be confusing for new entrants with limited resources. All parties want to be able to participate in the auction, should be able to understand its workings. I consistently hear when I'm out on the road from parties about how complex it is to participate in our auctions. And so at my request, this item includes language clarifying the relationship between the CMA level and county level bids. Hopefully, this language will help participants clearly understand how we're running the auction and how to execute on their goals. Thank you to my colleagues in OEA for their support on this edit, and many thanks to the Office of Economic Analysis for their work on the item. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Starks. On this date in 1969, the Beatles' album Abbey Road was released. 50 years later, we draw inspiration from the lead song on that album and come together to seek comment on the procedures for the 3.5 gigahertz auction and take another step forward in our work to promote American leadership in 5G wireless services. Making more spectrum available for the commercial marketplace is a central plank in our 5G FAST plan. We've already completed 2 successful high-band spectrum auctions this year, and on December 10th, we will start an incentive auction in the upper 37, 39, and 47 gigahertz bands. This will be the largest spectrum auction in American history, with 3,400 megahertz available. But a key commission priority regarding spectrum under this administration has also been to free up more mid-band spectrum for next-generation wireless services. A good example is the 2.5 gigahertz band. With almost 200 megahertz, this is the largest contiguous band of terrestrial flexible use spectrum below 3 gigahertz in the United States. And this summer, finally, the FCC majority liberalized the rules for the band, allowing more entities to access the spectrum, eliminating unnecessary restrictions, and moving toward an auction next year of wide swaths of unused spectrum in the band. We're also working on the complicated task of freeing up spectrum for 5G in the 3.7 to 4.2 gigahertz band, commonly called the C-band. This is going to be a critical band for 5G, and I am optimistic that later this fall, we will be voting on an order to make a significant amount of spectrum available in the C-band for 5G. But today, we come together to focus on the 3.5 gigahertz band. Like the 2.5 gigahertz band, this 3.5 gigahertz band is prime mid-band spectrum that holds particular promise for 5G. But when I became chairman, we didn't have the right rules in place to encourage 5G deployment in this band. However, thanks to Commissioner O'Reilly's leadership, last year we changed key characteristics of the band's priority access licenses and our approach to competitive bidding. And these critical reforms have made 3.5 gigahertz licenses much more appealing for 5G operations and will encourage the rapid deployment of next-generation wireless networks in the band. Moreover, together with certain stakeholders, we've been doing the hard work necessary to make the band's unique dynamic sharing model effective. And just last week, we reached a milestone as the FCC authorized 5 Spectrum Access System administrators to begin initial commercial deployments in the band. And this is great news, and together with this public notice, it makes September a big month for the 3.5 gigahertz band. It also means that auction winners should be well positioned to start providing service in the band very quickly. I want to join my colleagues in thanking Commissioner O'Reilly and his staff again for their efforts on this proceeding. And thanks also to the staff that worked on this item, from the Office of Economics and Analytics, the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, the Office of General Counsel, the Office of Managing Director, and the Office of Communications Business Opportunities. With that, we'll proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Votes yes.
Okay. Commissioner Carr.
Aye.
Commissioner Roseworcel.
Approve.
Commissioner Starks.
Approve.
So it's 2 approves, 1 yes, 1 aye. The chair votes to approve as well. I think that means the item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Thanks again for all the great work to the team. Madam Secretary, could you please take us to item number 4 on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the 4th item is entitled Amendment of Section 73.3580 of the Commission's Rules regarding public notice of the filing of applications, modernization of media regulation initiative, and revision of the public notice requirements of Section 73.3580. The item will be presented by the Media Bureau, and Michelle Carey, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And Ms. Carey, if you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Morning.
Today, the Media Bureau presents a further notice of proposed rulemaking as part of the Commission's Modernization of Media Regulations initiative. This further notice sets out specific proposals for modernizing and simplifying the rules requiring broadcasters to provide local notice of certain applications filed with the Commission. Joining me at the table are Al Schuldner and Lisa Scanlon and Tom Nessinger of the Audio Division, and Tom will present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The Commission's rules require broadcast applicants to provide notice to the public that certain applications have been filed by making on-air announcements and/or by publishing notice in a newspaper, depending on the type of application. These requirements were adopted decades ago, when the public obtained information very differently than it does today. The current rule, which mandates on-air announcements and newspaper notices consisting of lengthy and detailed summaries of applications, is designed to provide the public with sufficient information to decide whether to travel to the station's main studio to physically view the application in the station's public file. Today, of course, the public files formerly housed in studios are available online at any time on a Commission-hosted website. Recognizing this, the Commission in 2017 adopted the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking in this proceeding, proposing to update these rules, but without specifying a replacement to the existing requirements. Subsequently, the Bureau engaged in discussions with stakeholders to arrive at the proposal that we present today. This further Notice of Proposed Rulemaking includes specific proposals to modernize broadcasters' local notice obligations in a manner that reflects the way the public currently accesses information, and reduces costs and burdens on applicants while facilitating robust public participation in the broadcast licensing process. The most significant proposed change is to eliminate newspaper publication of public notice substituting instead online notice on the applicant station's website or an applicant-affiliated website, or alternatively, any publicly accessible, locally targeted website. The online notice would directly link to the application in the station's online public inspection file. The further notice also proposes to streamline and standardize the information to be provided in notices and the timing of those notices for all broadcasters and applications. Finally, the further notice proposes to simplify the on-air announcements required for these notices and provides that these announcements will direct the public to the Commission databases where the public can view and comment on the applications. The Media Bureau recommends that the Commission adopt this further notice of proposed rulemaking and requests editorial privileges to make any necessary technical or conforming edits. Thank you.
And thanks to you for the presentation. We'll now turn to Commissioner O'Reilly for any comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, I genuinely believe we have reached an urgent moment in our media modernization efforts. Those of us who study the marketplace analyses and listen to feedback from industry leaders about how they run their businesses continue to receive a common message. The FCC needs to eliminate or modify any and all unnecessary government burdens so traditional broadcasters can fully compete against their competitively unregulated rivals who are taking a larger share of scarce advertising revenues within the markets served. Refusal to provide even a modest amount of breathing room risks suffocating the regulated industry. As for today's item before us, I strongly support the merits of removing the newspaper publication requirement and other reforms and seek to move the item to final order expeditiously. In terms of specifics, I've always considered it constitutionally suspect to require stations to conform their speech to a government-mandated formula and continue to have reservations over adopting scripts within the text within our rules. However, if our goal is to modernize existing disclosure requirements, at least the bright line rules we propose today may ease compliance. The broadcasting community finds these proposed scripts to be much, much better than existing ones and is grateful to the Media Bureau's significant efforts to eliminate grossly outdated rules and truly streamline those that remain. For example, my understanding is that in test runs by stations, the scripts happen to track a 30-second spot, a standard format for broadcasting programming. I appreciate this attention to important detail, conforming regulations to a format that actually makes sense in the real world. This leads me to my last point. Any proposal submitted in the comment process supporting burdensome information disclosures, additional script language, or litigation traps for stations in the form of compliance burdens will find me in opposition, and I would hope that such efforts do not make it into the final order. With that, I once again thank the chairman for bringing forward modernization items every month, and I look forward to continuing to work with him on further ideas in the future. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Carr.
Thanks very much to the staff for your work on this item. I think as was noted in the document, some of these rules were first put in place 50 years ago during a very, very different era of the media marketplace in terms of competition for broadcasters. I think, unfortunately, some people continue to be stuck 50 years ago, failing to appreciate the competitive landscape that a lot of broadcasters compete in today. And so I think this is consistent with our broader effort at media modernization of recognizing the existence of the internet and seeking comment on ways that can be used to reduce costs and therefore continue to free up money for more investment in local news, information, and journalism. So thank you very much for your work on this item.
Thank you, Commissioner Carr. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
I won't have a statement. I'll just say that I think this is a smart effort to update local notice obligations for broadcasters, so this rulemaking has my full support.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Starks.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I've noted in the past, without public input, this agency would have a hard time doing its job. We rely on the expertise and experience of folks across the country to make our rules, consider our transactions, and determine whether our licensees are meeting their obligations. Making sure the public is adequately aware of opportunities to share their experiences with us is a critical part of this process. I fully support today's item, which will allow us to further develop a record on how best to exercise our statutory mandate to ensure that the public has notice of proceedings involving our consideration of broadcast licenses. I'm pleased that this item recognizes that local public notice of licensing activity is required by statute and searches for ways to use modern tools to make it more effective. Specifically, I support the item's proposals to continue to require both on-air and written notice of certain licensing proceedings and questions on the way to best offer such notice online. I'm hopeful that a robust record will develop on these issues, and to that end, I successfully proposed a number of questions in today's items pertaining to whether we can also harness additional tools that are used in other contexts to make sure that these notices are reaching as many people as possible in our local communities. Namely, I hope to hear from commenters on whether tools that have been deployed in the repacking context, such as social media posts, mobile app notifications, and television text crawls, can help make sure that local audiences are fully aware of the opportunities to share their experiences with the Commission. I'm intrigued by the possibility of using social media posts or mobile apps, as these platforms are typically more accessible for those who rely on mobile devices rather than home broadband connections, as we know many communities do. As these notices move out of newspapers and onto websites, we need to do all that we can to make sure that we continue to reach communities that may not be fully connected. Further, I successfully proposed questions about whether to retain information about our public interest standard in certain on-air scripts, whether to require broadcasters to disclose any rule waivers they're seeking in these notices, and whether to retain some description of issues at stake when a licensee is designated for hearing. In my view, all of this information would add much-needed context for viewers and listeners to help them better understand the nature of our FCC proceedings. And with these additional questions and a robust public input on the other proposals in this item, I'm hopeful we'll develop a record that will help us bring these rules fully into the 21st century while remaining true to our directives in statute. I appreciate the Chairman's engagement and the willingness to include my revisions and the support of my colleagues. I appreciate the hard work of the Media Bureau in preparing this item and advancing this proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll have a statement for the record, but I'll simply say that I cannot improve upon the presentation, and I want to thank the Media Bureau, the International Bureau, and the Office of General Counsel for the fantastic work and the work that is yet to come on the media modernization effort. With that, we'll call a vote. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Aye.
Commissioner Carr.
Approve.
Commissioner Rosenworcel.
Approve.
Commissioner Starks.
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Thanks again. Madam Secretary, to the piece de resistance, item number 5. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the fifth and final item is entitled Amendment of the Commission's Policies and Rules for Processing Applications in the Direct Broadcast Satellite Service. The item will be presented by the International Bureau, and Tom Sullivan, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Sullivan, we turn to you.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The International Bureau is pleased to present for your consideration this draft report and order that recommends updates to the Commission's rules governing the Direct Broadcast Satellite Service, or DBS. The draft order is part of the International Bureau's continuing efforts to evaluate the Part 25 rules and covering satellite services. The item updates and streamlines the rules to keep pace with industry and technological changes. In this proceeding, the Commission examined, for the first time in 10 years, the licensing provisions for DBS. I'm joined at the table by Troy Tanner, Deputy Chief of the Bureau, Jose Albuquerque, Chief of the Satellite Division, Stephen Duell, Chief of the Satellite Policy Branch, and Sean O'Moore, Attorney Advisor in the Satellite Policy Branch. I would like to acknowledge the contributions on this item by my colleagues in the Office of Economics and Analytics, Office of General Counsel, and the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. Sean will present the item.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, good morning.
Morning.
The item before you is a report in order to update and streamline the rules for Direct Broadcast Service, or DBS. Commonly known as satellite television, DBS provides video programming to consumers through small dish antennas on consumer premises. DBS is provided by satellites in geostationary orbit using the 12.2 to 12.7 gigahertz band for downlinks to subscribers and the 17.3 to 17.8 gigahertz band for uplinks of programming to the satellites. It's a popular satellite service with more than 30 million subscribers in the U.S. Applications for new DBS licenses have been under a freeze since 2005, pending the establishment of new licensing and service rules. Since then, both satellite technology and our rules for satellite licensing have continued to advance. In 2015, for example, the Commission extensively updated and streamlined the rules for geostationary fixed satellite service, or FSS. FSS shares many of the same technical features as DBS, with a notable exception being the wider 9-degree orbital spacing required for DBS satellites compared to the 2-degree spacing required for FSS satellites. This is due to the smaller customer antennas used for DBS. Accordingly, the item before you proposes to update the rules for DBS to bring them into alignment with the streamlined rules adopted for FSS. Most importantly, the item proposes amends the rules for DBS to first, process requests for new DBS satellites using a first-come, first-served licensing process. Second, apply the same milestone and bond requirements to grants of authority to provide new DBS service that are applied to geostationary FSS satellites. Third, extend the license term of non-broadcast DBS satellites from 10 to 15 years. Fourth, lift the freeze on new DBS applications. And fifth, clarify that once the freeze is lifted, authority for new DBS service may be requested using less than the 9-degree orbital separation, provided that the applicant shows that their proposed system would either not affect existing DBS operators or that there is a coordination agreement with those operators to protect against harmful interference. In conclusion, the item before you would bring to DBS the same streamlining benefits that the Commission has already extended to other satellite services, such as FSS. It also provides a path toward new opportunities for expanded or improved DBS service, either through new entrants or increased use of orbital and spectrum resources by existing DBS providers. We therefore request that the Commission adopt this report and order and request editorial privilege for technical and conforming edits.
Thank you, Mr. Moore, for that presentation. We'll now turn to comments from the bench, beginning with Commissioner O'Reilly.
I thank the staff for all their work. I won't have a statement on this item. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Carr.
I'll join Commissioner Riley in saying thank you for all of your work on this. Obviously, it's part of our broader effort to streamline a lot of our rules in this area. So thanks for your hard work on this item. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner Rosenworcel.
Today's report and order updates FCC rules that govern direct broadcast satellites. It lifts a 14-year freeze on requests to provide new DBS service, and it allows for reduced orbital spacing in the process, so it has my support. But when it comes to this agency's satellite priorities, I am totally mystified that we are spending time on streamlining DBS rules when there is no demonstrated interest from any new entrant. When it comes to satellite updates, our focus should be on modernizing orbital debris policies in services where there is growing demand. Over the past year, the FCC has approved more than 13,000 satellites for launch. Not one of them involved DBS. But when you consider the size of those new constellations we have just approved and the extraordinary number of objects headed to space, you realize we need to address junking up our skies, and we need to do it sooner rather than later. That's why more than a year ago, I called for a comprehensive review of our orbital debris policies to mitigate collision risks and ensure the sustainability of space. What are we waiting for? We can't keep kicking that count down the road and insisting orbital debris is the province of others that lack authority over commercial systems. Instead of DBS, we need to make orbital debris our satellite policy priority, and we need to do so now.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Starks.
No comment from me. Thank you for the hard work, team.
Ditto here, except to say thank you to the International Bureau, as well as your colleagues from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, the Office of Economics and Analytics, the Office of Engineering and Technology, the Office of General Counsel, and I believe the Office of Managing Director. Truly interdisciplinary effort that has my support. With that, we'll turn to a vote. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Aye.
Commissioner Carr.
Approve.
Commissioner Rosenworcel.
Approve.
Commissioner Starks.
Approve.
Chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Thanks again for the great work. Are there any announcements from the guys? Commissioner Rosenworcel.
I just want to make note that Kate Black, who is my media policy advisor in the office, has been out on book leave for her book. about women running for office. And in her place, Jessica Martinez has been doing amazing work. And she also, in that capacity, has been working on Hispanic Heritage Month at this agency. So I want to invite everyone to come and see the work she's been doing, because on October 16th in this room at 10:30 a.m., we will have former FCC Commissioner Gloria Tristani, former California Public Utilities Commissioner Catherine Sandoval, and a journalist who you can hear on the local NPR station talk a little bit about Hispanic Heritage Month. And I just want to make sure everyone knows about it and can come and celebrate it and celebrate the good work that Jessica Martinez has done to make that happen.
Thank you for that announcement. It will not change the fact that I still beat Jessica in fantasy football this past week by 3 points. Thank you, Terry McLaurin, for not catching more passes. All right. Anybody else? Commissioner Starks?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I have to throw you. You got to do what you got to do.
I like it. I'd like to announce briefly our fall class of interns and fellows. Unfortunately, because school is in session today, a couple members of my new team couldn't make it out today, but they are with us in spirit or hopefully online. Bryce Janney is a 2L at George Mason Antonin Scalia Law School. He is excitedly awaiting the birth of his first child, a daughter named Charlie, in about 2 weeks. Next, we have Brendan Hanley, who is here, who's joining us from the University of Virginia Law School, Prior Law School. Brendan worked as a paralegal at a large law firm headquartered here in Washington, D.C. for over 10 years and developed his interest in communications law. Next is Darien De Leon, who's in her final year of law school at AU. She came to the United States from Trinidad when she was just 3 years old. And next we have Rachel Weir, who's in her third year at Georgetown, is an undergraduate from Harvard, spends her free time exploring DC's museums. Finally, my legal fellow is Taylor Lamb, who's also here. Taylor graduated from Georgetown Law this past May, is from South Georgia, is a dog, I understand. Yes, and attended University of Georgia, where she studied journalism and international affairs. Thank you, team.
Don't you have a gator in your office as well?
I do have a gator in my office. That's exactly right.
Good luck. That's all I can say. Sorry, go. Yeah.
Just real quick, I also want to introduce the fall interns that are working in my office. I don't think either of them are here. I think they were also at school, unfortunately. The first is Michael Nimchik. He's a 3L at my alma mater, Catholic University of America, Columbus School of Law, where he serves as editor-in-chief for the Journal of Law and Technology. And Ari Bental, he's a 2L at American University, and he's a member of the AU Law Review. So I wanted to welcome the two of them aboard to the agency and thank them for their work here for this fall semester.
Thanks, Commissioner. We have a couple announcements in our office. First, and this is a sad one, the departure of our policy advisor, Nathan Leamer, the famed practitioner of the dark arts. I don't know how you describe Nathan. For those of you who've worked with him, he's just super energetic, unbelievably optimistic. Rabid Eagles fan. Basically, if you took Tony Rahm and you raised him to the Jake Tapper power, you would get Nathan. So now Lisa Folks, the chief of the Public Safety Bureau, is left on her own to defend that hapless team. Nathan has just done a terrific job with so much across the Commission's agenda over the last 2.5 years, working on some of the most complex, challenging issues the Commission has confronted, from the Restoring Internet Freedom Order to a lot of the digital divide work we've done, from spectrum auctions to media modernization. I mean, Nathan's been in the center of all of it. And through it all, he has exhibited just a fantastic collegiality, a consistent, bright, sunny disposition, and a willingness to work together with folks from across the political spectrum to get things done. And Nathan, I just wanted to let you know, both as a coworker and as your friend, I really appreciate the fact that our paths crossed the last 2.5 years. Wish you well at Targeted Victory, where I know you're going to do great things. And just know that there's always going to be a cup of coffee ready for you if you ever want to come back. Nathan leaves some very big, stylish, square-toed shoes to fill, and those shoes will indeed be filled by Evan Swarstrapper, who I think is, the newly shaved Evan. So Evan will be the policy advisor in our office. He comes to us from the office of Commissioner Carr, where he has been working as Commissioner Carr's media advisor and working on other policy issues. And he also, but before that, he worked at Tech Freedom, where he's the director of public affairs, where he worked on a whole variety of issues, from broadband to media, video, regulation and the like. He also managed the groups to communications and outreach teams. And he also, at Tech Freedom, co-founded and hosted the Tech Policy Podcast, which I had a chance to appear on. And he now hosts the FCC's official podcast as well. So he has a great facility with that new medium. And he also, before working at Tech Freedom, worked as a staffer at the New York State Assembly and worked on various political campaigns in New York City. He received his undergrad degree from George Washington University, and I know he's going to be a terrific addition, even though Nathan is, of course, a hard act to follow. So, Evan, welcome aboard. Also, another change in our office, Preston Wise, who has served very ably as our special counsel on some very challenging issues involving, say, the rural healthcare program, high-cost program, and other wireline issues. He's going to be our legal advisor for rural broadband. And his focus on this comes not just personally. He comes from North Dakota, much to the chagrin of everybody we met last week in South Dakota. But he also really believes in the mission of these programs and has worked exceptionally hard, as the folks in WCB know, to make these programs work for rural Americans. And so, Preston, you've been fantastic in the time that's passed, and we know you're going to be great in the time to come. Outside of our office, I do have an announcement with respect to one of the programs here at the FCC that is very close to my heart, the Honors Attorney Program, a program I had a chance to oversee when I was working in the Office of General Counsel about a dozen years ago. This year, we are very fortunate to have 13 new attorneys join our agency as part of that Attorney Honors Program, which has been a critical pipeline for the best and brightest legal talent in this agency. They are grizzled veterans now, having been here a whopping 9 days, and they are an incredibly talented and accomplished group. As is typically the case, they come to the FCC with exceptional academic backgrounds and a tradition of excellence, unlike the Oakland Raiders. We would like to take a moment to introduce them to you, and I'll ask them to stand, if you don't mind, folks, as I call their names. From the Media Bureau, Amanda Farenthold. She is a true Commodore in the literal sense of the word, having graduated from Vanderbilt University and Vanderbilt Law School. John Cobb, who graduated from the College of William and Mary down in Williamsburg, and Emory Law School down in Atlanta. From the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, Anthony Petrone, who survived a time in our office to graduate from the University of Connecticut and the George Washington University School of Law. Jacqueline Rosen from the University of Florida and the team that lost to the University of Kansas's football team, Boston College Law School. Will Holloway, who is from Sewanee, the University of South in Tennessee, as well as the Catholic Law School here in Washington. From the Enforcement Bureau, Brandon Thompson, who graduated from Cornell in New York and the University of Southern California Gould School of Law. Ryan McDonald from the Patrick Henry College in Virginia, as well as the Antonin Scalia Law School at George Mason. From the Wireline Competition Bureau, good luck, folks. Your work is cut out for you. Callie Coker from the St. Mary's College in California, as well as William & Mary School of Law. Cody Vensky, who comes to us from the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. He graduated from St. Olaf College, as well as Stanford Law School. He's a cardinal, the color, not the bird. Mason Schifa from Yale, which I understand is a school in New Haven, Connecticut, as well as William & Mary Law School. In the Office of Economics and Analytics, Daniel Habib from the University of Michigan, go Wolverines, and American University's Law School here in D.C. The Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, Emily Kaditz from Brandeis in Massachusetts, as well as the University of Colorado Law School. The International Bureau, Jamie Ann Fuller, who graduated from Kenyon College in Ohio, as well as Harvard Law School, and is a big space fan, as I understand it. So, I'd also like to recognize, in addition to this fantastic group of folks we see arrayed before us, this second-year class of honors attorneys, and I'll also ask them to stand. Jesse Goodwin from the Wireline Competition Bureau, Christopher Smeek from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, Haley Steffen from the Wireline Competition Bureau, and Kirk Arner from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. This is a super impressive group. We really look forward to incredible things from each of you. Congrats on becoming the newest members of the FCC family. And I mean it when I say we really do incorporate you into everything we do. One of the senior members of our own office is a graduate of this program. We really look forward to you contributing your expertise and enthusiasm on the many important things within our jurisdiction. And a special thank you to the Office of General Counsel for recruiting such talent and overseeing this important program. We can love to give them a round of applause. As, And should there be no further announcements, Madam Secretary, could you please announce the date of the next FCC Agenda Meeting?
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission is Friday, October 25th, 2019.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Until then, we stand adjourned. This chief stuff is truly shameless.
Hello, hello. Looks like we are all ready to get started for the chairman's press conference, so I'll turn things over to Chairman Pai.
And thank you, Ms. Pelkey. And welcome, folks. Since my first day as chairman of this commission, I've talked about how our #1 priority is closing the digital divide. And for the past 2.5 years, I've been traveling around the country to highlight the benefits of connectivity, to learn about the challenges of the people and places that are still offline, and to discuss what the FCC is doing and can do to deliver what I call digital opportunity to all Americans. Last week, I visited North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and the greatest state, the state of Kansas. And so now my travels as chairman have now carried me to all 48 states in the continental United States. But of all my trips to see the connectivity challenges facing U.S. citizens, none had a bigger impact to me than my visit to Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. I went to Puerto Rico shortly after Hurricanes Irma and Maria hit that territory in 2017, and then I visited both U.S. territories again in March of 2018. That latter trip was 6 months after those historic storms. And during that second visit, you could still see the evidence of the hurricane's impact, but it was also clear that both Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands had connectivity challenges that preceded and went beyond storm recovery. The FCC's response to help the territories recover and rebuild after these storms has been unprecedented, and I'm very proud that the Commission moved quickly to provide $66 million to help with initial post-Maria restoration efforts. And again in May 2018, we approved an extra $64 million for this purpose. With the restoration of communications services on the islands now substantially done, now we need to and will execute on a long-term strategy to improve, expand, and harden the broadband networks in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And you saw the most important step of late taken just moments ago when the Commission, on a bipartisan basis, approved almost $1 billion in investments to do just that. In my view, at least, this plan is not just substantial, it is smart. We are using a competitive bidding process to award financial support for fixed broadband, which will help us get the most bang for the buck, and to make sure that citizens in the territories can enjoy the same high-speed broadband services that we have on the mainland. We will give preference to fixed broadband providers who will deliver gigabit service. To make sure the communications networks in Puerto Rico are more reliable and resilient, we favor more resilient technology solutions like buried fiber over things like aerial wires strung on utility poles, which are, of course, much more vulnerable in the circumstance of a hurricane. And we will ensure that 5G comes to the islands as well, as I described in my separate statement. The bottom line is that today's action goes far beyond simply recovering from the devastation wrought by Irma and Maria. It's about enabling everyone in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands to benefit from the opportunities of the digital age. This funding can bring broadband connectivity to people and places that have never before had high-speed internet access. And so this is not a plan to return to the way things were. It's a plan to help the territories move forward boldly into the digital future, to give folks like Marilyn, who you might have seen in the picture from Utuado, Puerto Rico, be able to improve her circumstances, the circumstances of her family, her community, and ultimately the entire territory. So I really appreciate the efforts by the Commission's fantastic staff across the entire Bureau, Wireline Competition Bureau, Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, Public Safety Bureau, and the many others who've worked on these issues. And I'm grateful to my fellow colleagues for their support. With that, I would welcome your questions.
Todd, take it away.
Thank you. Hi, Mr. Chairman. Todd Shields, Bloomberg News. Earlier this week, you all put out a notice about Sprint taking payment for some 800, nearly 900,000 inactive Lifeline subscribers. Can you walk us through what's next, and could the penalty be over $1 billion, calculating from earlier FCC Lifeline penalties? We come up with a figure potentially of more than $1 billion. Is that possible?
I can't go beyond the statement I put out. We've referred the matter to our Enforcement Bureau for further investigation, and so I can't comment on what steps the Enforcement Bureau might take depending on what they find at this time.
Thank you.
Hi, I have a few questions. The first is, Will you support Commissioner Rosenworcel's suggestion that you hold, or the FCC holds, field hearings following future storms along the lines of Maria, Irma, or Katrina?
We've done extensive visits to the territories. As I mentioned, I personally have been to Puerto Rico right after the storms hit. Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands again in the spring of 2018. Worked very extensively. And if you talk to the representative from Puerto Rico, if you talk to the head of the regulatory body for telecom in Puerto Rico, if you talk to one of the members of the Public Service Commission in Puerto Rico, if you talk to the members of the Commission of the U.S. Virgin Islands, if you talk to the former governor of the U.S. Virgin Islands, you will see that the FCC has been a very integrated and constant presence. It has had a very integrated and constant presence in the territories. And so regardless of what storms might come, what emergencies, what might happen, which places they might occur in the United States, I've made it a personal priority to be on the ground, talking to the people who are struggling, who need our help, to be able to deliver it in a timely way. And that's a commitment that I take very, very seriously.
Hi, Chairman. Kelsey Griffiths with Law 360. I was wondering if you have any updates you can share on what's going on with the 5.9 gigahertz band, including what you might need to hear from the Department of Transportation in order to move forward with a fresh look in PRM, as I think you've indicated you would like to do.
I appreciate the question. I don't have any update today to share beyond what I said a couple of days ago, which is that we're continuing to work with our federal partner on the way forward. And so we hope to be able to make progress on that front in the near future.
Howard Besker, Communications Daily. I wanted to ask you about the supply chain NPRM. That's sort of been before the agency for quite a while now. And can you tell us anything about where you're at on that, or should we expect something on that before the winter or anything like that?
I can't give you a specific time frame, but I can say that we are very actively working on that proceeding, and I've talked to a number of my colleagues both within and in other federal agencies, within this agency and from other agencies about the way forward. So a very critical issue. I've talked about it a lot, both here in the United States and abroad. And so it is certainly one of the foremost issues that we've been handling of late.
John Reed, Bloomberg Law. Does the Sprint's alleged fraud of the Lifeline program, does it raise questions about whether Sprint should be allowed to participate in Lifeline?
I can't comment on that particular question because that would rely, of course, on what facts the Enforcement Bureau adduces and what recommendation they might make to the Commission. So I would just say the question is premature at this time.
Chairman Matt Daneman, Communications Daily. Regarding the orbital debris proceeding at the FCC, can you give a sense of where that stands? Will there be activity, or will this be brought up before this calendar year? And how is the agency treating this with relation to what Commerce Department had urged, which was a sort of a pause on the proceeding?
Absolutely. So this is one of the important issues that is on our plate with respect to the satellite innovation we've been trying to introduce. And I personally talked to our International Bureau Chief and other FCC staff on the appropriate way forward. It's a very complicated proceeding, involves not just the complicated technical challenges because space innovation on this scale is new, but also because there are some other tricky legal and jurisdictional questions that we want to sort out. And so we were working very actively on that proceeding. Again, here I can't give you a specific update on the timing, except to say that we are sorting through the record, which was a very fulsome one, and we hope to be able to make progress on that.
Hi, Jonathan Make from Communications Daily.
And Con Daly showing up in force today. All right. Yeah.
Well, we have other folks we could have sent here too, but
We play zone defense.
So I just came back from a conference of local regulators, and all of them expressed concern about their relationship with the FCC, and they see it as not a very good relationship. So I'm wondering what your suggestions might be to them, to the FCC, to any other stakeholders, just to improve the relationship between the FCC and the local telecommunications officers, cable franchise officers, that sort of thing.
We work very well with state and local officials. Just last week, I had a chance to visit with a number of them across the Great Plains, from representatives in the Kansas State House to representatives from the governor's office in the state of Kansas. Work extensively with folks across the country in a similar fashion, and I'm really proud of the fact that we've made a lot of progress on certain issues. For example, with respect to Lifeline, which was raised earlier, We've empowered state commissions, once again, to be able to take the lead in the ETC process, eligible telecommunications carrier process. It's something that was stripped from state officials during the previous administration. We've re-empowered them to do that because we recognize that state officials, in many cases, are the most active cop on the beat on some of these issues. And so there are always conversations on a lot of these issues with our state and local counterparts, and that's just in terms of our substantive rulemakings. Additionally, through our Intergovernmental Advisory Committee, we do take the input very seriously. I just had a chance to thank the most recent iteration of the IAC a couple of days ago, and I listed some of the things that they had done in terms of coming up with an inventory of real property and the like to help the FCC inform its decision-making in a richer way. And so, notwithstanding what a few folks might have said there, I can say that writ large, the relationship is a good one, and we very much believe in it.
Thanks. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Tyler Talenko with CTFN. It's been pretty widely reported that interdepartmental politics has gotten in the way of good spectrum policy. Will the FCC move forward with a repurposing or license modification without the sign-off of all members of IRAC?
I suppose it depends on what particular band that you're talking about, but what I can say is that we are always looking forward to working with our federal partners in a constructive way to advance the ball. And that ball is, as we understand it, was outlined by the President on April 12th at the White House event that we held, in which he said he wants the United States to lead in 5G and the development of next-generation wireless technologies. And we have taken that policy position, which is one that I think is shared by many folks, many consumers that I have the chance to meet, and we're trying to work with our federal partners to find a productive way forward, to enable them to use spectrum in a way that might be important, but also to keep our eyes fixed on that need for American leadership in 5G. All right, thanks so much, folks.
Thanks, everyone. We'll turn to the Bureau press conference with my colleague Mark. Take it away.
I think we can just go in order today. Any questions on the Puerto Rico USVI funds? Monica, so Wireline, please come up. Go ahead.
Hi, can you please describe in a little bit more detail the revision regarding how you weight resiliency when using composite poles and where it fits in the weighting scale between the other?
You're talking about the request that Commissioner Carr mentioned. Yes.
Is that in the revision?
Response. Yeah.
Sure. So based on a proposal we received while the item was under review by the commissioners, and at the commissioner's request, we've added that for if instead of receiving the highest score, which is the worst score for aerial wireline deployment, a carrier that uses composite high-speed wind-graded poles will receive a reduced score, that is a better score, for that portion of its aerial deployment that uses those poles on a ratio or percentage basis.
Is there an exact ratio at this point?
Is there, I'm sorry?
Is there an exact, like, number?
Yes, it's the same score that a provider would receive for a fixed wireless deployment or satellite, or satellite or microwave backhaul. So instead of 60 points, as few as 40 points.
Thank you. And were there any revisions aside from that?
There were revisions in response to other ex partes that are reflected in the item throughout.
And is there anything you can point to specifically?
Not specifically. The item should be out in the relatively near future, so.
Thank you.
Any others on this item? Okay. Okay, and then the next item is the access arbitrage, which is a different team, but wireline, any questions on that item? Monica? Okay.
From my understanding, some of the revisions relate to an ex parte that TCA and AT&T sent last Friday. Was there anything in that ex parte that was not incorporated in the revisions or some variation thereof?
So, Eric Raven Hansen, our attorney who presented the item, described the change to the definition of the access stimulation trigger, and that was an outcome of the ex partes after circulation. The current trigger for becoming an access stimulating LEC is a 3-to-1 trigger terminating to originating access and revenue sharing agreement. The commission adopted a separate set of triggers that doesn't include revenue sharing. For CLECs, it's a 6-to-1 ratio, and for incumbent rate of return LECs, it's a 10-to-1 ratio, and threshold of $500,000 minutes of traffic a month, and it will be reflected in the item that's released.
And these carriers who do meet these very high thresholds, do they meet the definition, ongoing, or is there a certain number of months that they fall into that?
Yeah, they meet the definition on an ongoing basis, but they can essentially lose their status as an access stimulating LEC if they fall outside the trigger over a defined period of time. And I will leave it to you to read the item when it's released, which hopefully will be fairly soon.
Okay, and is there any change to the challenge process, or is there a new challenge process?
No.
Thank you.
Sure.
And I'm sorry, one last one. The rule would take place immediately or after 45 days, or?
So the tariffing provisions of the rule will take place 45 days after publication in the Federal Register of the summary of the item, which, as you know, is the standard practice for the timing of effective date is triggered by publication in the Federal Register. There is a small portion of the item that will require Paperwork Reduction Act approval through OMB, and that will take place after that approval process. But the tariffing piece and the fundamental parts of the item, the switch in financial responsibility, will take place 45 days after publication in the Federal Register. I'm double checking with my team. I'm getting the nod, so.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any others on this one? Thank you, Wireline. Auction, any questions on auction procedures for Wireless Bureau? Okay, media modernization is the next one. Are there questions on that item? Okay, and then the final is the DBS rules. Any questions for international on DBS? All right, thank you very much, and the commissioners are here for their press conference.
Good afternoon. How's everyone today?
We're doing great, thank you.
I liked your banter. I could hear it.
We heard about that.
We decided we should have a 10-minute talk show, just breaking down
We're
the
going to
game.
insist on a live mic from now on in other webcasts, so.
Oh, you're mic'd all the time. Just you don't know about it.
Let me for one thing off the top that I wanted to do during the open meeting, but Pi beat me to the punch when he gavelled us out, which is twofold, which is obviously to add my recognition to Nathan for his nearly 3 years or 2.5 years service here at the commission. He did a terrific job. In fact, I can put it better than Richard Bennett. I think this was a quote, actually, Howard Income Daily. Richard Bennett said, "Nathan did a good job, but there are plenty of energetic young people in the free market world that can replace him without missing a beat." I think with respect to Richard, I take a different view. I think, Nathan was pretty unique in the work that he was able to do both inside the commission and helping to make sure our message is clear to the outside world as we translate it. And similarly, Evan in my office, who's now being called up to the big leagues, has done really tremendous work as an advisor on media regulation issues inside the agency. He's not a lawyer, and that was actually a real benefit. As he worked through the items, he could help us translate it into talk that non-lawyers can understand. And with him gone, I'm now going to revert to a computer where I talk about 47 CFR, Part 36 accounting rules, and we back to boring people with FCC speak. Hopefully I can learn some of the lessons that he brought to the office and some of his strengths, not just working through the right policies and all these items, but being able to sort of articulate our position. So big loss for our office, but very, very grateful and thankful to Evan for all that he's done. And I do agree, at least at some level, it should be a seamless transition for him up to the chairman's office, and thankfully only a wall away, so we'll still get the benefit from his service. And I presume we'll have a longer statement sort of formally making the announcement, but just wanted to express my appreciation to both of them. So thanks.
I would only add, if you know Richard, he might say the same thing about you and me. So. Questions for us?
Yeah, I've got one for Mr. Carr. You've taken a number of meetings with T-Mobile representatives since Mr. Pai circulated the Sprint T-Mobile merger for approval in mid-August, at least 9 by several counts, including mine. What's going on? Can you fill us in on why all these? And have you voted the item, and will you tell us when you do? Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, I think we've had an open door since the document has circulated, not just with one company. There's others that have come in and expressed their views. Happy to hear from a range of stakeholders on it. I think my position has been clear all along in this proceeding. I think after spending a lot of time with the record, said it publicly that I'm in favor of this transaction. I think it's a real big win for U.S. leadership in 5G. It's going to get us really a long way to bridging the digital divide with this commitment that was put in the record to bring 5G to 99% of the U.S. I think being able to really put to more productive use and a bigger deployment of the mid-band spectrum, the 2.5, that's going to be another big win. And I think being able to offer this in-home broadband product so that consumers that today feel like they have one or no choice for home internet service can see even more competition there. So I think it's a great deal. I think we've been diligently doing our work, working our way through the item. I think it's no surprise to anybody that it's a lengthy document. Staff has done a yeoman's job collecting all the information, putting in the record. There's dozens of economic models that have been run to produce the document. And I assume, just like my colleagues, that we've just been doing our due diligence, working our way through it. I would expect to be done very soon. But no formal news to break on that.
Can you tell me the nature of this, though? It's due diligence, you're working your way through, you support the deal, but what's the substance of your discussions with these people?
Yeah, no, absolutely support the deal. Just working our way through the document, through the analysis in there. And again, I think we're getting to the end of it, and hopefully we'll be able to in a position to have the document released publicly for you all as soon as possible. And then you all can spend as much time as you like with it. But I would just view it as just spending our due diligence with it, like I'm sure all my colleagues are doing at this point in time. I think there's not much more to it than that at this point.
Thank you.
Commissioner Carr, were you okay? Sorry about that. I wanted to ask you if you could potentially clarify some statements surrounding the Third Circuit's decision. Sorry, that was the D.C. Circuit's decision on the small cell environmental and historic reviews. If I remember correctly, your statements in a lot of the FCC's press when this first came out in March of last year focused on excluding small cells from those historic and environmental reviews. And now that that part of the order has been invalidated by the court, it seems like potentially your office has kind of changed focus and said that the bulk of that order was not invalidated. Can you speak to sort of how you see that focus and whether you have changed your focus on what's important in that order?
No, not at all. My position has remained the same, which is we need to update and modernize our infrastructure rules so that we can more quickly build out small cells and other 5G infrastructure. That when we came into these jobs, at least when I did, we had an outdated approach that was slowing it down. The decision that we issued, I think, took very clearly a belt and suspenders approach. On the one hand, we took a look at small cells. We excluded them entirely from the environmental and historic preservation review based on our determination. I think is very reasonable that there wasn't sufficient degree of federal control to turn those into federal projects when it's private parties deploying pursuant to state authorizations in terms of the siting side. At the same time, we issued another set of decisions in that order, including taking a look at upfront fees and removing upfront fees from applying to anything that does continue to go through the process. So we've talked a lot about the exclusion of small cell. I think it's easy to understand conceptually, a very simple concept, I think the right one. But there's a couple different ways that you can get at the same result, which is how do we eliminate unnecessary costs and unnecessary processes that are slowing things down. So I think it's easy to understand on the one hand to say we excluded them, but we've also removed the economic incentive for a lot of the use that we saw. For instance, some of the key examples that we would point to in the record in the actual decision. There's a parking lot that I've talked a lot about in Houston outside the Energy Stadium. The issue there was this upfront fee process that had resulted in $173,000 in environmental and historic preservation review fees going to putting up small cells or antennas on this parking lot. So regardless whether you characterize it as removing them from the process entirely or the significant portion of this that was upheld by the DC Circuit, which is if we were to go back through that same deployment today, it wouldn't have to go through that upfront fee process. So I think the way I would review it is, we took two decisions, I think, that both ultimately achieve the same goal, which is updating, modernizing, and eliminating the incentive for these escalating upfront fees that we have. I think obviously we were right on the front end. The DC Circuit disagreed, and that's fine. But we're very happy that those back-end decisions were upheld because that gets us to the same point of ending that skyrocketing process that we were seeing in terms of time and cost for the upfront review process. So very happy with the decision.
Are you able to answer what the FCC might do next on small cells?
No, I haven't made any decision for myself, let alone for my colleagues at the Commission on what's next. We're always open to ideas, but we haven't set forth any proposals, and there's nothing that's particularly in mind right now that we're building towards, but we're open to ideas.
Thank you.
Okay, Howard Busker, Communications Daily. I had a question on, I'll start with a question on CBRS, and then I had an infrastructure question, but let's break it up a little bit. On CBRS, you now have the auction scheduled, or there will soon be an auction scheduled. How long is it going to take before we have a better feel for how well 3.5 is going and whether it's really everything that the Commission was hoping it would be? And how are we going to know, whether it's a real success story or not?
Is that to me? Yeah.
We'll start with you.
Well, look at my conversations with those that are in the industry side of the equation have been going gangbuster. They're really excited in what they're able to do. I can't give you a full picture because we're still in the GAA side of the equation, so the unlicensed service that's being offered, that is, and we're still in the initial commercial deployment stage. So we're, it's going to take a little bit of time. I don't have a demarcation point of it. At this point, we'll know. But every indication that we have so far, and if you were unfortunately unable to make the kickoff event, you would see the excitement. The providers and those that are going to operate in this space are and I'm hearing enormous, kudos to all the good work of the staff to get us to this point. So I'm really excited. The fulsome picture won't be done until we actually have the licenses as well, which won't be until late, some mid next year, mid to late next year.
Right, yeah, I was with our friends at CCA that week. So the other thing I wanted to ask about was
Go Providence.
Providence, yeah. I wanted to ask about so. It seems like I keep hearing a lot about the CTIA, WIA proposal and, for further changes to, but then the cities and the local governments and the states and stuff are saying it's not prudent to move forward with more infrastructure stuff like this while there's still a case before the Ninth Circuit. So I just wanted to sort of ask that question because everybody's asking about wireless infrastructure, so I interpreted that to be a cool thing to ask about today. So,
Well, I'll throw my 2 cents in and let Commissioner Carson, since he's been leading some of the efforts of these. I'm in favor of streamlining the rules and addressing the fact that local governments and state governments are problematic on the macro towers. We've talked a lot about small cells, done a lot of activity on small cells, but I think we need to act on macro towers, and I've said as much multiple times. And so I'm fully ready to move forward whenever the commission is.
Yeah, thanks for the question on this. I think the petitions that you mentioned in particular, and to be honest, I have not read those petitions yet, but my understanding is those go to issues either exclusively or at least principally dealing with Section 6409 of the
Right.
Spectrum Act, which is a different statutory provision than the one at issue in the litigation. So I don't necessarily see significant overlap there, although, again, with the caveat that I haven't read those petitions yet. And I do think, it's been talked about, we have some local elected officials, I think really to a person, this is, big city, small city, everybody wants to see 5G. Everybody wants to see the jobs, the opportunity, the next-gen connectivity. There's been some disagreement about how to do that, and that's fine. We had a lot of support in the record, several dozen local elected officials that agreed with the cut that the FCC made. I was in Sioux Falls, South Dakota a couple weeks ago with the local mayor, and his position is that, big cities are going about it wrong if they're looking to charge $1 million fees up front and then charging exorbitant fees on top of that to build out. So it's not a unified position, although I fully hear and respect the fact that the approach we've taken is something that a fair number of state and local governments don't agree with. But I think it's very clear under the law as to the right answers. And more broadly, you step back, why do we have to update? Why do we have to modernize? Well, again, it's one, so that every single community gets a fair shot at this, and two, we are in a global competition. And right now, the U.S. is leading the world in 5G. We had 14 cities go live last year, about 32, 33 today, going over 42 by the end of the year, and China has 0 right now. So we are in really good shape. And if you look at the acceleration of small cell builds that coincide with some of the decisions we've made, it's tough to argue with those facts. You can disagree with how we did it. I think not, obviously my position on that is pretty clear, but we had 13,000 small cells in 2017, 60,000 went up in 2018. By the end of this year, we'll have a total now of 200,000. So the build-outs have accelerated, and I think it, is the right path for us to have taken. I'm really proud of the decisions we've reached and comfortable with our legal authorities.
thank you.
This is part of a coalition that's been petitioning the FCC since 2016 to open up the 12 gigahertz band to support terrestrial 5G service. Is that something the FCC should take a closer look at? It's been pending, for a couple of years now.
It hasn't been on the front of my radar recently. I don't recall taking meetings on that recently, so I don't know if you've had a different experience. That's not to say something's not going on that I don't know about, but I haven't had a lot of meetings on it.
Perhaps along the same kind of lines, I'm curious, Global Star petitioned the FCC a year ago about 5.1 gigahertz band and interference it was saying it was receiving from its now terrestrial use. Do you have any kind of sense as to when, if the FCC will act on this petition? Do you have personal thoughts on this petition whatsoever? What's going on with 5.1 gigahertz?
Similarly, I don't recall taking meetings on this recently, so it hasn't been brought to my attention. So I don't have an opinion to offer at this point on it.
Yeah, I would say I probably spent too much time talking about Global Star in the last many years, but this hasn't been one that has generated attention in the last many months, so I'm not aware of the commission working on something, but we'll just have to see.
We're just helping with docket cleanup day, so just doing our part. I just wanted to ask both of you a little more generally, kind of, it's a bit reflective of your responses to Howard. Just came back from a meeting of local regulators, and I did speak to probably 24 of them, and all of them were concerned about the relationship between them and the FCC. I asked them what they think they could do to improve things, and I just would like to ask both of you if you see any improvement possible in the relationship, if you think it's a good relationship, that sort of stuff. Thanks.
Well, look, technology is changing everyone's role, and particularly local government involvement and the NTOA folks specifically. And I'm sorry their role is shrinking by nature, and that makes people upset. And they would seek to maintain power that they don't deserve. We've taken a number of activities, and a number of actions at the commission to address those issues. Some, a few, I would say, have entered into areas that they shouldn't have, and that tends to spark, some strong beliefs. We respect the statute. And as technology changes, we try to adhere our policies to that very strongly. And their role is shifting before our very eyes, and there's nothing I can do about that.
I mean, for me, again, I think this is one where, reasonable people can have good faith disagreements about how to apply the law and the solutions. There's no doubt that the common denominator here is what's good for our communities, what's good for the people that we represent. There's different ways to get there. But I think if you look back historically, there's really not a lot new here. Every time a new technology has come out, the FCC has worked to update and modernize our approach to infrastructure bills. We did it in 2008 with shot clocks that resulted in the Fifth Circuit City of Arlington decision, where there was a lot of pushback from cities there. That case went all the way to the Supreme Court. Whether it was the 2014 decision that the FCC did on infrastructure that ended up out of Maryland in the Fourth Circuit. So I don't think that there's anything too new or different here. New technologies come out. We have to interpret the decisions that Congress has made. Congress has had no effective prohibitions. What does that mean today? We provide our guidance, and just like 2008, just like 2014, there are cities that are going to push back and litigate, and that's really expected. I think, again, what was surprising in this case is we did have several dozen state and local officials that wrote to the FCC and supported. I know that a lot didn't, but the point being, it's not unanimity among state and local governments, and it's what we've seen in 2008, what we've seen in 2014, and our job is to make our best call about what does effective prohibition language mean, provide our guidance, and then we go on.
This was about the small cells order from last year. Is that what you meant?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Good afternoon. I understand that Legato's spectrum repurposing efforts are said to be held up by the
You guys really are doing cleanup today. That's good.
the Department of Commerce, potentially for political reasons. What are you guys doing, or can you do to get past that?
Well, I don't know the situation you speak of, and I'd have to defer that question to the chairman. So I don't have any particular, and I've said long ago, I didn't have the involvement to lead this issue, and so I'm just waiting to see if something comes my way. I'm not involved in that conversation you speak of.
Are you in favor of approval, or?
I don't know what it is, so I can't say what I would be for.
I've not heard anything along the lines that you've characterized as true or not true, so I can't comment on it. I haven't been directly involved with the administration on those issues.
Can you tell me when the FCC plans to answer an industry petition to delay the changes on the Lifeline minimum standards that are set to take effect on December 1st, given that some providers in some places would need to give 60 days notice and kind of coming up against that?
Sorry, remind me, these are changes that were put in place by us, changes put in place previously. Okay, yeah, I don't.
My answer is I apologize, but I have to defer that answer on schedule to the chairman. He controls the schedule, and I don't. I've met with many of the parties that have expressed this. I've expressed some sympathies to some of their points, and we'll just see if anything happens in the time period you speak of.
And one final question: do you have an update on the NOI for the annual National Broadband report? Is that a little bit later than normal?
I'd have to defer to the chairman's office on the 706 report.
Thank you.
Thanks, all. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
I could send you.
Sure, that'd be great.
Hello.
Hi. Hello.
Hi, I'd like to ask you the last couple of questions I asked. Do you have an answer on when the FCC will answer the industry petition on delaying the minimum standards on Lifeline that are set to take place?
No, I don't. You'd have to ask the chairman, but I fully support a pause. I'm concerned about the reduction in minutes for those who rely on the Lifeline program.
Thank you.
I certainly wouldn't have anything on the chairman's schedule on that either. But I know the increase in data caps as well is something that a number of parties are focused on there, and not being able to bump up the amount of data given the 9.25 subsidy is an issue that I think I've heard from some parties as well.
Thank you. And the other question is the NOI on the annual National Broadband report. Is this delayed? Is there any concern over that?
That's a terrific question. What's going on? We have a statutory duty to have a regular report on the state of broadband. As best I recall, we all voted on that weeks, if not months ago. Why hasn't it been released? I mean, everyone in Congress is clamoring to make sure that we have better broadband data, better broadband maps, and do more for the areas of the country that today do not have adequate broadband deployment. Why has this agency slowed down the release of that inquiry? It looks to me to be suspect. I'd like to know what's going on, too.
Is there a possibility that they're slowing it because they're waiting for better broadband maps?
We have a statutory duty to do this under Section 706 regularly. We have all voted on it. I have no idea why they are holding it up, keeping it pent up, and not letting it see the light of day. We should be releasing it. We should be seeking comment on our broadband policies and the state of broadband deployment, and we should be doing it right now. We've all voted on it. It's ready to go out the door. I have no idea why there's been a delay.
Thank you.
Hi, Commissioners. Question for you both on 5.9 gigahertz. Are you able to share any information about what you might be waiting on or what the Commission might be waiting on in order for the FCC to move forward, particularly out of the DOT?
That's a terrific question. You know, I'm old enough to remember that it was a few months ago we were going to start a new proceeding on the 5.9 gigahertz band to finally revisit this spectrum, which was set aside for intelligent transportation systems back in 1999. That was 20 years ago. Broadband technologies, automobile technologies have all evolved since then. It is a smart thing to do to go back and ask if this 75 megahertz of spectrum is up to date. Can we do new things with it with Wi-Fi? Can we do new things with it with auto safety? Across the board, we should be revisiting our stale policies from 2 decades ago. For reasons I don't understand, the chairman decided that we would not be moving forward with a new rulemaking on the 5.9 gigahertz band. I fully support us doing so, and I hope we can do so sooner rather than later.
And my understanding as well is that DOT asked us to pause our decision in favor of them working through further what's going to deal with DSRC and some of the strong interests and equities that they felt that they have. And I'm also eager for us to get moving on our item as quickly as possible and hope that interagency coordination with DOT is moving as quickly as practicable.
We are moving down the line.
Moving down the line. Wireless infrastructure, there's been a proposal filed by, and it will just say the industry proposal, which I'm sure you've seen. And I think there's already a lot of state and local government concerns, and and there's also a case that's before the Ninth Circuit that hasn't been resolved. So, are you reluctant to see the FCC sort of engage in another infrastructure item like that? I know, Commissioner Rosenworcel, you had your suggestion for where you'd like to see them go next, but are you reluctant to sort of launch something more like that would be along those lines of what WIA and CTIA are proposing?
Well, whether we do or not is ultimately up to the chairman, but let's review where we are with wireless infrastructure and courts generally. This is 2019, and the DC Circuit took our first effort at wireless infrastructure and shipped it right back to us, and by and large vacated our decision regarding wireless infrastructure siting and the National Environmental Policy Act and the National Historic Preservation Act. And by the way, That came on the heels of a decision to send back to us and vacate our work on Lifeline, and was followed up by another decision just this week to vacate our media ownership rules. Across the board, this agency's policy work is being reviewed by the courts, and the reviews are not good. So with respect to wireless siting right now, we are waiting for the Ninth Circuit. And the Ninth Circuit, as you know, is reviewing our other big effort on wireless infrastructure. So we have a lot of work to do going forward, and as you might have heard me today, when it comes to wireless infrastructure, I think our next priority needs to be wireless resiliency. The GAO has told us that we need to do some work on our wireless resiliency framework, and all of us know that there'll be another hurricane in the future that will merit that review now, and not when it feels urgent in the aftermath of a storm. So that's where I think our wireless infrastructure priority should be right now. And with respect to the work that's been done by the courts on this, they've had a lot of difficulties with this agency's policies.
And I think the most critical thing that we need to do is make sure that we are, and it goes to a question I know that was asked to the chairman and to my colleagues as well. I think the most critical thing we need to be doing is working with our localities. These are the folks who are empowered and authorized to make these decisions for their localities, and we need to make sure that we are and best suited to make decisions for their for the citizens that live there. We need to. The FCC will do best to work with rather than against our localities.
Okay, and then I also just, Sprint T-Mobile, that seems to be, well, there's a lot of questions about that because, you know, something circulated, we haven't seen anything more. There wasn't a, you know, since it wasn't circulated for a meeting, they didn't release a document. I think both of you have had some concerns about all of this, and so where are things at right now as far as you understand with this agency and the Sprint T-Mobile deal?
This review has been bonkers. It's been crazy. Our colleagues agreed to this transaction without having before them any legal analysis, engineering analysis, or economic analysis. We now have a text, but I find it bizarre that they all agreed to this before they even circulated a document. And now they're spending time making changes to that document, but have not shared with us what those changes are. I certainly encourage you or anyone else after this is released to ask what the difference was between what was initially circulated and what eventually will see the light of day. I think it will be instructive to try to understand what changes were made and why.
And in my mind, we saw a major development this week, which was the announcement of the largest Lifeline investigation ever. It was announced Tuesday morning by the chairman. Immediately upon hearing that news, I called for a pause in our consideration until that Lifeline investigation is run. It is the largest Lifeline investigation by far. The second largest one is 40,000 ineligibles for American Broadband in 2018. This is 885,000, so that's like, you know, do the math, 20 times larger the number of Lifeline ineligibles that were getting money by Sprint. Until we know how that investigation is fully resolved, I don't see how we can have confidence in transferring, allowing two parties to merge, considering especially the liability and the exposure that is out there. I just don't think we can proceed with the transaction until that Lifeline investigation is resolved.
I just want to say I fully support what my colleague has suggested, but I also want to acknowledge our other colleagues said that they would support this transaction without any legal analysis, engineering analysis, or economic analysis. So we are in a strange place when it comes to process at this agency, and I don't have confidence that we're going to proceed as my colleague has suggested, though I believe we should.
Just to be clear, just a clarification. So like with items that are before you for votes, you know, like for commission meetings at least, I know that members of the FCC will circulate their edits and say this is what the change. So you're not, there's no chain like that where
I
you're
have
not
not
seeing
seen
anything?
a single edit, nor has my office been part of any discussion regarding edits.
That's right, I haven't seen any edits either.
Okay, thank you.
A lot of analysis and process for the T-Mobile Sprint review. Do you think the FCC could be violating the Administrative Procedure Act?
Reasoned agency decision-making is something that courts will probably review in the future. But I can tell you, in my time at this agency, I have never seen 3 colleagues publicly announce their support for a transaction before a document is even in our offices. I think that's disturbing. I think it doesn't reflect the best efforts of this agency to try to assess what's before us, take into consideration the work and concerns of stakeholders. It's just an announcement. I think people should expect more from Washington. They should expect more from regulators. They should expect more from this agency.
I'm not, and I've said this before, including in our Senate oversight hearing, when the fundamental structure of the Sinclair Tribune deal changed, that was put out for public comment. Here, I believe the fundamental structure of the deal has changed, including with Dish being added. The fact that it has not been put out for public comment is deeply troubling to me. Whether it will ultimately get to an APA violation, ultimately a court will have to decide that, but I am troubled that the public has not been able to comment fully on the nature of this change deal.
C-band clearing, Commissioner O'Reilly in particular has been somewhat positive on the C-band alliance proposal. The chairman has indicated something this fall. I'm curious, of the various jockeying proposals, do the two of you have particular thoughts on which you seem to find most sensible?
Don't have anything before us at this point, so I can't really comment on that right now.
Yeah, I don't have significant thoughts on that either, other than, I think we need to be led by the science and what is engineeringly best. And I think we also need to make sure that the U.S. Government and the U.S. American citizens are the ones who benefit from any changes that go here. I'm troubled by the aspect of a private auction, and I believe that that's not the way to go. That's the way that I'm thinking right now.
Hi, I've just been asking all of the FCC members about the agency's relationship with local governments. Just got back from a conference with them, and of all the different local government officials I spoke with, various size, cities, they did not think it was a good relationship and are concerned about being encroached upon. So, what I'd like to ask both of you, and I know Commissioner Stark said, it would be better to have a good relationship. What steps do you think the FCC can do, and maybe even that the localities can do to help improve that relationship? Thanks.
I'm a big believer in the proverb that if you want to go fast, you go by yourself, but if you want to go far, you need to go together. And when it comes to the FCC and state and local officials, we're not doing enough to work together. Granted, we live in times where technology has changed. Not every piece of infrastructure is intrastate. Many new services have an interstate quality. But we also have a long tradition of local control in this country. We have a 10th Amendment, and this agency has got to respect the interests of local authorities in having a say about what goes on in their backyard. If you want a good example of it, a few months ago, we made decisions about when moratoria on construction were acceptable and when they were not. And as a result, we told cities like Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, which stops building during hurricane season, that they no longer have the authority to do so. We told that same city, which stops building during the economic height of tourist season, that they no longer have the ability to do so. I think it is deep within the DNA of this country that we allow a degree of local control. And the FCC has to figure out how to simultaneously advance infrastructure and our national objectives and work with states and localities to make it happen. And on that score, the agency has a lot of work to do.
Nothing further than what I said before. I really just think it is, especially where, we see that a lot of localities are trying to empower themselves by taking municipal broadband, local broadband, and that too has been subject to preemption or really has been choked out at the state level in some instances. But at the same time now, from the federal level, we are impressing structural changes, and that I think is troubling. I think these localities need to be empowered to make the best decisions for their local citizenry.
Thanks.
Anything else? Or is it lunch?
Lunch.
It looks like lunch. All right. Thank you all. We'll see you next month.
Thank you. Thanks.